a charming and spirited young mother.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Is found strangled in her bedroom.
Whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
Police face a challenging crime scene.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No fingerprints. No eyewitnesses.
This case was a definite whodunit case.
And a long list of suspects.
He had been hanging around her desk, and he had made some comments that really creeped her out.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done. Their relationship was over.
You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Until one big break reveals a culprit.
That one key piece of evidence was the aha moment in the case.
And it shocks everyone.
When they finally discovered who it was just surreal.
There's no rhyme, there's no reason behind it. It was absolutely senseless.
Just before 5 p.m. on a Monday in March of 1999, in the small bedroom community of Norcross, Georgia, police raced through the suburban streets in response to a 911 call.
The only information that we had at hand initially was there had been a person discovered dead in an apartment. It was her fiance that had called 911. When we arrived at the scene, we spoke with the fiance briefly.
The man tells detectives the victim is 20-year-old mother of one, Danielle Jennings. Her 2-year-old son is currently at daycare.
The fiance told us he walked in and found her lying on the bed, and he stated that she was cold and blue.
She was deceased by that point. She was face down on the bed, and he rolled her over and then called 911.
While Danielle's fiance is taken to provide a statement, investigators take a close look at the crime scene.
When you went back into the bedroom, she was on the bed, fully clothed, laying on her back, but you could obviously see signs of strangulation.
She had a ligature around her neck. The ligature appeared to be some type of stocking, and it was tied around her neck very, very tight.
It had been tied off to leave it that way. It's not like it released, which I thought was pretty unusual. I mean, whoever did this left her there with no chance to survive.
The ligature was knotted in the back, which would tell you that the person was on her back, behind her when she was strangled.
Detectives explore the rest of the crime scene, looking for clues.
The bed was messed up. One of the dresser drawers was open. The stocking that she was strangled with may have been one of hers out of that drawer. Her purse was dumped out as if somebody had dumped the contents and rummaged through it. It could have been a robbery or a burglary just gone wrong. However, there was other stuff such as cameras, miscellaneous jewelry that could have been taken, but they were not taken.
It was possibly a burglary that had been interrupted, but you always have to consider the possibility that it could have been a staged burglary because, frankly, there really wasn't a lot of disruption.
Next, investigators try to determine how the killer entered the apartment.
There was absolutely no tool marks or anything on the front door, and then there was a sliding patio glass door. It was locked. There was no evidence of tampering with it at all. We went around and we searched the outside, but we didn't turn up anything of any value.
Before they return to the station to interview Danielle's fiance, detectives fan out to speak with other tenants in the complex.
Most of the people in these complexes work during the day, and so most of them are not home. We left our business cards with a note asking them to please give us a call.
As the crime scene investigation continues, News of Danielle's violent murder quickly spreads to her family and friends.
When I found out that Danielle died, I said, no, you've got to be kidding me. I said, this cannot be real. And then I dropped the phone and I just started screaming. I was just absolutely in utter shock. How does one handle the information that your best friend, your sister, the person that you basically love more than anybody in this world is gone? Why would somebody do this to such a loving, caring, beautiful person?
Born in Columbia, South Carolina in 1978, Danielle grew up with her mother and stepfather in Stockton, Georgia. Even in her youth, Danielle had a magnetic personality.
She was beautiful, strong, tenacious, ferocious. She was very fun. Danielle was always ready to have a good time, to laugh.
Oh, she was so vivacious, like a little firecracker. She was very tiny, but she had this big attitude. She was sweet and loving, but she just didn't take any crap off anybody.
Danielle showed her resilience when she was left to deal with an unplanned pregnancy alone at the age of 16.
There was never a doubt in her mind that she wanted to have that baby. She wasn't scared. I mean, she had brass balls of steel.
She wasn't going to let her age stand in the way of being a good mother.
Danielle gave birth to her son, Tristan, in 1996.
She was so proud. I could see her little attitude in him.
The new mother longed for her son to have a father and hoped she had found one when she started dating Luis Payano.
We grew up with Louis, so we go way back with him. We met Louis in our early teen years. Danielle was always partial to Louis, and Louis and Danielle were dating, and I was so thrilled. And the way that Louis would look at Danielle, like she would walk into the room and he would just light up.
Soon, the couple moved into an apartment together, and Danielle landed an office job at a landscaping company.
She was so excited to have like what we titled a big girl job. She was very proud of herself. We were all very proud of her, you know? She was going places.
In December of 1998, Luis asked Danielle to marry him.
She was so excited, and I'm like, this is going to be the best marriage ever. When Danielle first got her engagement ring, it was too big. And I said, girl, you got to get it sized. She's like, I don't want to take it off. It was beautiful.
Danielle had everything going for her. She had a great career opportunity ahead of her. She had a man she was so excited to marry. She had a beautiful son that just meant the world to her. Danielle was really on top of her game.
She was probably the happiest I had ever seen her.
Now, all Danielle's happiness and hope has been stolen by a cold-blooded killer.
I could not even begin to fathom why somebody would do that to her.
Back at the crime scene, investigators are searching for answers.
The scene raised several questions. Of course, the most obvious was, how did whoever it was get into the apartment? Because there was no sign of forced entry. Was it someone she knew? We know, working off the percentages, that the person most likely to kill you is laying next to you in the bed. In this case, Danielle's fiance, Luis.
Coming up, detectives unearth dark secrets.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past.
He was violent. He was abusive. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad.
He was just very, very creepy to me. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
The person that did it could have been amongst us.
And just as the case threatens to turn cold,
We felt like we had hit a brick wall.
I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it.
a stunning revelation points to a killer no one suspected.
The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought. I don't think anybody saw it coming.
Police investigating the murder of 20-year-old mother Danielle Jennings have their first suspect, her fiancé, 25-year-old Luis Payano.
Even though he's her fiancé, everybody remains a suspect until such time that we solve the crime.
Investigators question the distraught young man.
He was very emotional, but romance can raise anger to a level sometimes that leads to homicide.
Detectives begin their interview by asking Luis about Danielle's movements the day of her murder.
He stated that he had been at work all day. The last time he had seen Danielle was when he left to go to work.
According to Luis, they had both left the apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle went back into the building to get something. He tells detectives that Danielle seemed distracted because of an upcoming work meeting.
She was supposed to be having a meeting with management that day. She didn't feel easy about it.
Luis says Danielle called him at work around 11:30 a.m.
She wanted to see if Luis would have lunch with her, but he was tied up at work and he couldn't break free.
They didn't have lunch, and later in the afternoon, he couldn't reach her.
He called her at work, and then they told him that she had gone home at lunchtime, but she didn't come back from lunch after a couple of hours.
Luis tells investigators he called Danielle's cell phone and their apartment.
He stated that he was trying to get hold of Danielle and was not getting a response, and then he left work and went home to see if she was there.
Luis said that when he got home, the front door was unlocked, and that really surprised him because they were pretty careful about keeping the front door locked.
Detectives ask Luis about his relationship with Danielle.
We wanted to find out if they had domestic issues. He said that it was a very good relationship and they were very much in love with each other.
To verify his story, detectives call Luis's work and Danielle's loved ones.
Her family and friends stated that they were just a young couple that was very much in love and looking forward to getting married and spending their life together.
She had had some troubled boyfriends in the past, but Luis was on the up and up. I mean, he was setting up a financially stable life for him and Danielle and Tristan, and she loved him so much.
Danielle's friends are adamant that Luis would never harm her, and his alibi seems solid.
We were able to confirm that he had been at work all day through statements of his coworkers. As a result, he was eliminated as a suspect. Now you're on the hunt for other suspects.
With Luis in the clear, detectives ask him if he knew of anyone who may want to harm Danielle.
He brought up the name of Jeff, a co-worker of Danielle. She had filed a sexual harassment complaint against him at work. That piqued our interest a little bit. We immediately went to Danielle's place of work and we met with her supervisor and discussed what was going on.
Danielle's supervisor tells detectives about the young mother's harassment complaint against her coworker.
He was a middle-aged man. He worked at the same landscape company. He had a different job. He was in management. Danielle told her manager and supervisor he had been hanging around her desk and he had made some comments that really kind of creeped her out and acting inappropriately at work.
There was a big age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40, she was 20. He had asked her out for lunch, and she told him that she had a fiancé that she loved, and he had made a comment to her that if he was 20 years younger, things would be a lot different.
Danielle had briefly touched base with me about the situation that she was having at work. Dude was kind of crushing on her, and she was trying to get that, under control. But I said, just don't let it get out of hand.
She filed the complaint. I kind of admired her grit. She wasn't going to take it. The company was very responsive to her complaint. They took it seriously. They moved quickly.
Detectives note the timing when told of the company's response.
That day that Danielle was killed, she was supposed to be having a meeting with upper management about the sexual harassment charge.
Once we realized that the meeting had taken place that day, that was something that was suspicious.
Talking with the management, we found out Danielle was anxious and nervous about the meeting.
She was a relatively new employee when she made the complaint. That was one of the reasons she was so nervous, because his career was in a certain amount of jeopardy.
Coworkers state that after the meeting, Danielle went home for lunch, but never returned.
She didn't come back, and we knew that was consistent with the time of death. You had to think, where was the coworker at the time?
Detective suspicions increase when they learn that Jeff was out of the office and did not return until late in the day. Was this too much of a coincidence? Could he have killed Danielle as revenge for her complaint?
We definitely wanted to speak with him face to face.
Detectives hunting the killer of Danielle Jennings suspect a harassment complaint against her coworker, Jeff, may have led to retaliation and murder.
We were now focused on him as a possible suspect. We had to consider the possibility that he followed her home and ambushed her and killed her.
Investigators bring the 40-year-old in for an interview and ask about his interaction with 20-year-old Danielle.
He admitted to asking her out for lunch, but he said other than that, he had not done anything.
He talked about the sexual harassment complaint and pretty typically said, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I didn't know she was that offended.
According to police reports, Jeff denies any sexual intentions toward Danielle.
He told police that whatever lapse in manners that he had had with Danielle, that he liked her. He seemed to be genuinely dismayed to find out what had happened.
Detectives ask if Danielle's complaint gave him a reason to want to harm her.
His first reaction was he was angry. He was adamant that he was not a suspect. And then he said it couldn't have been me because my truck was broken and I was on a job with somebody else, with a coworker. And I can prove it.
Jeff provides investigators with the name of the coworker he claims to have been with.
We immediately ran down his coworker at like 1 o'clock in the morning. This guy verified that he was with him all day till the close of business. They were together.
With his alibi confirmed, police eliminate Jeff as a suspect. 24 hours after Danielle's murder, the enormity of her death is only just starting to hit home for Danielle's loved ones.
Things like that didn't happen where we grew up. I could not believe somebody would do that to her. It was just the most nightmarish thing I could imagine. It made me question God. Why would you let something that horrible happen to her?
I didn't want to accept it. I couldn't sleep. I just kept saying, she's dead, she's dead. Danielle should not be dead.
The following day, investigators receive the autopsy report and scour it for anything that might point to Danielle's killer.
The manner of death was asphyxiation or strangulation.
The medical examiner stated that she probably lost consciousness within about 15 to 20 seconds after the ligature was placed around her neck.
It seemed clear that she had been surprised by her attacker, had no time to move, had no time to strike back.
It's almost like it came out of nowhere. We knew from the positioning of the knot, someone had come up behind her with the nylon stocking, pulled it tight until she lost consciousness, and then tied it off to kill her. She had not been sexually assaulted. There weren't any other injuries. There weren't any defensive injuries.
This case was a definite whodunit case. There was no evidence found at the scene that could help us.
There was no forensic evidence whatsoever. No transfer of skin, no fingerprints, nothing a lab could look at.
After striking out with the autopsy, investigators revisit the theory that the homicide was a robbery gone wrong.
We don't live there, so we don't know what's supposed to be there and what's not. We asked the fiancé to go back through the apartment with us and tell us what he sees missing. The smallest detail sometimes helps point us into the direction of a suspect, but nothing was missing according to the fiancé. At that point, we had absolutely nothing to go on, other than the stalking that she was strangled with.
Detectives ask Luis if he recognizes the stalking.
We wanted to know whether it came from her. It was a tan, knee-high women's stocking, and he said that she never wore anything like that, and we didn't find any in the apartment. Whoever did this brought that with them.
The homicide was brutal, violent, and vicious. It lent itself to a personal motive. You would think that whoever did it had a score to settle.
Louise told us she had had some tumultuous relationships in her past, so we pursued that angle.
Investigators asked Danielle's friends about her previous relationships.
When they first started questioning me, they were asking me a lot of questions about her boyfriends in the past, who I felt might have been able to do it. And then it clicked that, Eddie, he was a tow truck driver, and he was a big guy. And he was just very, very creepy to me.
Her best friend told us about her ex-boyfriend. He was violent. He was abusive.
She ended up having to get a restraining order on him. But with Eddie, no one ever really knew when he was going to pop up again.
That was somebody we needed to look at.
Two days after the murder of 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, friends have alerted investigators to Eddie McElwaney, an ex-boyfriend with a violent history.
We learned a lot about her former boyfriend. We learned that she had begun to see him when she was a teenager, when she was younger.
Friends reveal Danielle started dating Eddie shortly after she became pregnant from another relationship. But Eddie's behavior soon raised red flags.
As they got more serious, he became more possessive and controlling, and he definitely wanted to start isolating her from her friends and family more.
I didn't want to be around him. I did not like the way he made me feel. I didn't like the way he looked at Danielle. I mean, he would sometimes look at her with disgust. And I know they had tumultuous fights.
We learned it had been an abusive relationship, physical and emotional.
I mean, she would stand up to anybody, but as tough and as a badass as she was, I think she was a little bit afraid of him.
Things only got worse with Eddie when Danielle gave birth to her child.
Her family and friends stated that shortly after her son was born, Eddie was getting involved in drugs, and that was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and she ended the relationship with that.
Danielle moved out and tried to start fresh, but Eddie had other plans.
She knew it was going to be difficult, but she didn't realize that Eddie was not going to leave Danielle in peace. He didn't want to accept the fact that they were done, their relationship was over. She never knew when he would turn up around the corner, when she just wanted to be left alone.
She had gotten a restraining order against Eddie because he had been stalking her. He had been driving back and forth in front of her house. He had gone to her work, and she was in fear that she was in danger.
We found out that he had violated the restraining order several times. He would call her, leave voicemails for her. He would drive by her house several times a day or night.
When police ask when Eddie last contacted Danielle, the answer is troubling.
Danielle's family had told us that within the last few months he had been calling her, trying to get her to talk to him, but she would just hang up on him.
Could Eddie have shown up at Danielle's apartment the day she was killed, leading to a deadly confrontation?
I've seen a lot of domestic abuse cases, so I knew that there was a possibility that with his past that he could have done something like that.
Investigators track down Eddie and bring him in for questioning.
In the interview with Eddie, he was kind of belligerent and unhappy to be there and a little bit hostile. You could tell when he talked about Danielle that it made him mad. What we saw with Eddie certainly had all the earmarks of a domestic violence case.
When questioned about his relationship with Danielle, Eddie's responses raised detective suspicions even more.
When he was asked about the relationship, his version was a little bit different. He never mentioned any abuse. He thought everything was great.
We asked him when was the last time that he had had any contact with Danielle, and he said that he had not talked to her for at least a year or longer. We know that he's lying about that from speaking with Danielle's family and friends. We knew in the last several months he had been calling her.
At that point, he's looking pretty good. So you have to determine where he was at the time of the crime.
Eddie tells detectives that he was working many miles away from where Danielle was killed.
He said that on his job as a tow truck driver that he had to go out of state.
Investigators immediately look into Eddie's alibi.
His boss verified that he was out of state and he was able to produce hotel receipts, gas receipts that showed that he was actually out of state at the time of the crime.
Whenever he responded to a legitimate call, he had to log it, and his whereabouts could be verified throughout the day.
That is a pretty tight alibi, so he was eliminated as a suspect.
It's another dead end for detectives.
Once again, we're knocked for a loop and we're back to ground zero, and he moves down the line and we're looking for somebody else.
It was infuriating. It was frustrating. I had a huge fear that whoever it was got away with it, because people get away with murder every day. I was really hoping that the detectives would find something, because you're sitting here trying to point a finger at somebody that you don't know who.
There was this air of suspense around everything because we didn't know at that time who had killed Danielle. The person that did it could have been amongst us.
We had basically eliminated everybody who was close to the victim. When you get to that point of an investigation, you don't have anywhere else to logically follow up.
With no more leads, the investigation is at a standstill.
We felt like we had hit a brick wall, and then we got a call that changed everything.
Three days after finding Danielle Jennings strangled in her apartment bedroom, police hunting her killer have just got a stunning new lead.
We received a phone call from a Miss Kirk that resided at the apartment complex.
The woman tells detectives about a disturbing incident that took place a week before Danielle was killed.
She was awakened one morning by someone knocking at the door, and she looked out the peephole but didn't see anybody there, so she went back to bed. And a few minutes later, she hears the front door open, and the maintenance man is standing there. The maintenance man says that he's there for a work order. However, Miss Kirk says she felt very uncomfortable the entire time that he was in there because he was always staring at her, like he was more preoccupied with her than he was completing the work order.
The woman cannot provide the name of the maintenance man, but she gives a description to police. Detectives head back to Danielle's apartment complex to investigate.
While speaking with the management at the complex, we found that there was another case similar in the past from a Miss Bruno that lived in the apartment complex.
Management told the detectives that someone had walked into this woman's apartment. She had, of course, asked him who the heck he was. What are you doing in my apartment? And he said maintenance, and claimed that he was there to change light bulbs. And she said, I don't have any light bulbs to change. He kind of mumbled and stumbled, and then, maybe I have the wrong apartment, and he backed out and left. It was so similar to the other one, which of course raises our eyebrows.
The complex was big enough so that there were several maintenance workers, but only one closely fit the description given by the young ladies. That would be Calvin Oliver.
We showed a photograph of Mr. Oliver to Miss Bruno and Miss Kirk, and both of them identified him as the person that had walked in on them.
Investigators discover a disturbing trend emerged after Calvin had been hired 7 months ago.
Come to find out, there had been several burglaries reported where items had been stolen out of apartments that had no forced entry.
Could Calvin have been responsible for these thefts?
We learned that he had an apartment in the complex. The fact that he lives there makes it so accessible that he could walk around, not be suspicious. We also learned that the custodians had access to the master keys of every apartment. He has complete access.
Detectives search for any link between Danielle and Calvin.
We found out that he had done a work order in her apartment a couple of weeks prior to the murder.
That is somebody that you really want to look at. It went back to our original theory of if this was a burglary, then it had been interrupted. He could have known that Danielle Jennings was gone during the daytime, and he decided that day that he was going to enter that apartment.
Investigators haul Calvin Oliver in for an interview, but make the call to slow play their suspicions.
When Oliver was brought in for questioning, we didn't want to tip him off to anything about the homicide. So he was interviewed initially about the burglaries. He absolutely denied any of that. He said, I didn't steal anything, I didn't go into apartments. He denied any involvement in any burglaries.
The 42-year-old tells detectives that his intrusion on the two women in the complex was a simple misunderstanding.
Once we got around to interviewing him about the murder, the first question was, did you hear about this? It was kind of odd. You would have thought that a person who worked in that apartment complex that was there every day would have heard everything about it. He went, yeah, I think I heard something about it. I don't know much about it. I don't know that woman.
He insisted he knew nothing about, as he described her, that dead girl.
All he admitted to knowing her was that he had done the work order in her apartment.
At that point, we had a pattern of conduct going into apartments. We had the admission that he had been in the apartment, but we had nothing that directly linked him to the murder.
With nothing concrete on Calvin, detectives end the interview. But before they let him walk free, police run a background check and are shocked by what they find.
He had a criminal history of burglary and theft. There was an outstanding warrant on him for failure to appear on a burglary charge in another jurisdiction. That day that Danielle was killed, if he's in there and she walks in on him, that would be a reason for him to cause her harm because he doesn't want to go back to prison.
He had an outstanding warrant, so he was held for that, and that bought them enough time while they investigated.
Based on the burglaries that had occurred in the complex, we obtained a search warrant for his apartment. We're trying to see if we can find anything that would tie him to Danielle Jennings. We're looking for any type of the stockings or pantyhose or anything that would be similar to the one that we found tied around her neck.
Detectives find no matching stocking, but they do discover incriminating evidence.
We do find evidence of the other burglaries that had been committed in the complex. And then we also found out that he had possession of a master key for the apartment complex so that he could open any door on any building at any time, and he was not supposed to be in possession of that key.
It's only enough evidence to allow investigators to charge Calvin with burglary.
We concluded that search with those items, but nothing was found relevant to the murder. You really don't have anywhere else to go at that point.
We don't have a stocking. We don't have anything that ties him to Danielle or her apartment at all.
That's where we were until Luis called. Out of the blue, he said, "Do you have the engagement ring?"
We told him, no, we don't have a ring. We didn't know one was missing. And then he describes the ring, and then the big bright light goes off. When we were doing the search on Oliver's apartment, we noticed a ring on a dresser in his bedroom, but the ring didn't match any of the items stolen, so we really didn't have a reason to seize it at that time. We do another search warrant, go back into the apartment, we seize that ring, we show it to the fiance. He can't positively identify the ring, but he says her best friend will definitely be able to identify it. If we were able to identify that as being Danielle's ring, that would physically tie Oliver to Danielle and her apartment on the day that she was murdered.
With the entire investigation on the line, detectives race to the home of Danielle's best friend.
Is that ring the engagement ring? This is something we gotta know.
Investigators believe the key to solving the murder of Danielle Jennings is her missing engagement ring.
If we had that ring, then we had the killer.
Detectives have seized a ring from suspect Calvin Oliver's apartment. But is it Danielle's engagement ring? They hope her best friend can answer that question.
The detective and Lewis were there, and I said, well, what's going on? And the detective looked at me and he said, Leslie, he said, do you know what Danielle's engagement ring looked like? And I said, yes, sir, I do. The detective said, is there any defining characteristics to this ring? He goes, and I need you to be specific. And I said, yes, sir. I said it was bent. She had bent the band so it stayed snug on her finger because she wouldn't take the dang thing to get sized.
We needed to find out when was the last time she had seen her wearing the ring.
I said, I saw Danielle the Sunday before she was killed, and she had her ring on Sunday night. And he takes the evidence bag out and he says, is this her ring? And the minute I saw it, I knew it was hers.
When we had that ring and had it identified as being hers, we knew that we had the guy. We knew we had the right person.
Finding the ring was the aha moment in the case. And that was the piece of evidence that allowed us to charge Calvin Oliver with murder.
9 days after her death, Calvin Oliver is arrested for the murder of Danielle Jennings.
The primary charge was malice murder, and that means that you intentionally and unlawfully kill another human being.
Detectives once again interview Calvin, this time taking a different approach.
Once you have a suspect under arrest for the charge that you're interviewing him about, then the interview becomes very direct. He was given a chance again to tell the story where he denied any involvement in the murder, and then he was confronted with the evidence that we had.
We told him about the ring, and that's when he said, well, I stole that ring 2 weeks ago when I did the work order in her apartment. But see, we knew that was a lie because we had people that had seen her wearing the ring, so we knew that he was lying about that.
Calvin refuses to answer any more questions.
We told him that he was being charged with malice murder because you took the pantyhose with you into the apartment because you had intent to harm someone, and he said there was no intent there, which was a good comment to have in a statement. It's like he admitted to killing her without knowing that he had admitted to it. We were convinced 100% that we had our guy. This is the guy that was responsible for the death of Danielle Jennings, and that we were going to send him to prison for the rest of his life.
News of an arrest in Danielle's murder brings relief to her loved ones and surprise.
When they finally discovered who it was, the maintenance man in her apartment building, it was just surreal.
I don't think anybody saw it coming. The killer was much closer to home than anybody first thought.
When I saw his picture, I threw up, knowing that was the man that strangled my best friend for no reason.
At trial, prosecutors present how they believe the crime unfolded.
The day Danielle was killed, Mr. Oliver had already let himself in, hoping for financial gain. After the HR meeting about her coworker, Danielle went home for lunch by herself. Once she opened the door and stepped in, he knew she was there, and he knew she could not exit again. He was not going to get caught.
He ambushed her from behind with the stocking. He came over her head. He pulled it tight, pushed her down onto the bed until she lost consciousness, and then he tied the ligature off, and there was no way for her to escape. There was no heat of the moment. There was no emotion. He killed Danielle because it made his life easier.
The jury hears about the prosecution's most damning evidence, Danielle's stolen engagement ring.
I had to be the one to testify about the ring because I identified the ring. I actually had to look at that man. I had to sit there and look at him. Calvin Oliver sat there just staring daggers into me, is what he did, and tried everything he could to make me feel uncomfortable. And I took a big, deep breath, and I stared right back at him.
There was no explanation for the presence of this ring in Calvin Oliver's apartment, other than he took it off Danielle Jennings' dead finger.
On October 13th, 2000, after a 5-day trial, the jury delivers their verdict.
He was found guilty on all charges.
The judge sentences Calvin Oliver to life in prison.
When the verdict came through, we were all holding hands. We just knew justice had been served as far as it could be. I mean, we were glad, but it still wasn't going to bring her back. Her mom was never the same again. It destroyed her. That horrible man took away an angel that was put here. She was a huge light to me, to her fiance, to her son. She was everything to a lot of people. To this day, I still dream of her. There's not a day that goes by that I don't miss her.
A devoted couple building the perfect family.
They were both very committed to adopting children that had a difficult past.
Everybody in the family loved her.
Murdered in a night of unspeakable horror.
She saw a man with what appeared to be an axe.
Her skull was split with a maul.
Who could have wanted Bob and Kay Swartz dead?
This person had threatened to kill them.
We couldn't rule out anyone. We just didn't know.
And what detectives uncovered has everyone blindsided.
I didn't have a single suspicion. I would have never thought.
The relatives were in disbelief.
The expected killer hadn't done it. The unexpected killer had done it.
Nobody in a million years would have expected them to commit one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Annapolis.
On a cold winter morning in 1984.
Armando County Police.
Police in Cape St. Clair, Maryland receive an eerie call.
Okay, what is the problem, sir? My parents are dead. You think your parents are dead? Yeah.
First responders race to the scene and make a horrific discovery.
When I arrived, there were uniformed officers that were protecting the crime scene who told me we had a 17-year-old and a 9-year-old who just learned that their parents, Bob and Kay Schwartz, were killed.
The children are visibly shaken and in shock, but agree to answer a few questions.
My partner and I met with a young man by the name of Larry Schwartz and his sister Annie. Both of them were very calm. This young man, he said that he had gotten up that morning and that Annie, who was 9, told him that she didn't know where their parents were. He then looked out the dining room window and saw his mother's body in the backyard. He told me he immediately shielded Annie's eyes so Annie wouldn't see her body and called the police.
Detective Barr leaves the kids in the care of the attending officers and moves to the backyard. It's his first grim look at the scene of the crime.
Kay Schwartz was found outside. She was a few feet from the sliding glass door in the snow. She only had one sock on her right foot. Her left foot was bare.
The blood in the snow was horrific. It was just horrific.
The blood had created a slush in the snow. Kay Schwartz had puncture wounds around her neck, and she had a massive wound to the top of her skull.
Detective Barr then heads inside.
I looked in the basement area, and I found a black vinyl chair that had pooled blood beside it. It appeared as though she had been attacked sitting in that chair, and she bled heavily onto the floor. And there was blood from that chair leading out back.
Just when it seems the crime scene can't get any more grisly, detectives discover another ravaged body.
We found a small office adjacent to the landing of the stairs. The door was closed. We opened the door, looked inside, and found Bob Schwartz's body. There was an inordinate number of stab wounds to Bob Schwartz. There were defensive wounds in the body. We theorized at that point it was very possible that Kay was attacked first, and then Bob heard the noise and started to come out of the room, giving Kay the opportunity to flee out the back door as the killer or killers went after Bob.
As detectives make their way through the rest of the house, they see no signs of forced entry. Did Bob and Kay know their attacker? Or did an intruder sneak in through an unlocked door?
As I viewed this crime scene, the enormity was off the chart. There was blood found everywhere. It was extraordinarily gruesome.
Investigators collect blood evidence, but there's no sign of a knife or any kind of murder weapon. Then, toward the back of the house, they spot a critical clue.
We found a bloody palm print on the sliding glass door near Kay's body. We wanted to figure out who it actually belonged to. Bob obviously never left the computer room. He died where he was attacked. And Kay's body was outside, and neither one of her hands had blood on the palms. That palm print probably belonged to the killer.
While concerned neighbors whisk Larry and Annie away, detectives get a chance to talk to some of Bob and Kay's grieving friends who have gathered at the house.
When I found out that Bob and Kay had been murdered, I said, "What? You're numb. You don't know what happened." And I just couldn't believe that Bob and Kay were gone.
Bob and Kay Schwartz met at the University of Maryland outside Washington, D.C. They were both getting their master's degree in education. They both wanted to be teachers. He was 35, she was 27. She fell in love with him, and maybe 18 months later they married.
They were very involved in all kinds of church activities. Kay and Bob were intimately involved. Everybody seemed to know them. Everybody felt a connection with them.
Bob was an engineer of sorts, worked at NASA Goddard down in Greenbelt, Maryland, in the space program on some level.
Bob had to be a pretty clever man because he was involved in computers back in the dark ages, 1984.
He was always very positive. He was funny, quick sense of humor.
Kay was the fun-loving, carefree spirit, beloved by everyone who knew her. Always wanted to be a teacher, became a teacher. They wanted children, but Kay was unable to have children.
Far from breaking their spirit, Bob and Kay's disappointment only seemed to strengthen their bond and gave them a loving sense of purpose.
They decided they wanted to open their house and their hearts.
In 1973, Bob and Kay embarked on their dream.
That became part of their mission in life, in adopting children that had a difficult past, to provide some substance and some guidance.
Larry Swartz was 6 years old when the Swartzes adopted him. 6 years later, they adopted a 4-year-old girl, Anne.
Annie was born in Korea, did not speak much English when she first arrived. Annie and Larry were happy to be part of that family.
Kay and Bob wanted to be the best parents ever to those children.
Now, Larry and Annie were orphans again, and detectives need to find out who committed such a heinous crime and why. Police begin by talking to neighbors, hoping to find a witness who might lead them to the killer.
We were alerted by a person approximately a block away on a parallel street that he had found what appeared to be a blood trail leading into the woods at the end of that street. And as we followed that trail, we found what appeared to be a barefoot footprint and a socked footprint.
Were these Kay's footprints? If so, how did they end up in the woods when her body was found in the backyard?
We also found a pair of footprints made by shoes. Footprints suggesting a chase through the neighborhood.
The trail of footprints ran for quite a distance through the woods and the neighborhood.
The footprints seemed to suggest that after stabbing Bob to death, the murderer went after Kay one last time.
In my opinion, it appeared as though Kay Schwartz was fleeing from her killer, and at some point, a person caught up with her and then walked her to the back of the home where she was killed.
At the end of the trail, detectives make one more pivotal discovery.
Searching through the woods, my sergeant found what appeared to be a murder weapon. It was a wood-splitting maul. There appeared to be blood on the maul, along with hair. But the handle appeared to have been wiped clean. There wasn't any blood on the handle at all.
Detectives send the maul to the lab, but find no trace of a knife anywhere. It's a puzzling scene that offers them few clues.
It was a very difficult crime scene to try to put together in your mind what may have happened or how did this occur. At this point, we only had 2 children, Larry and Annie, who could provide any information.
When detectives circle back to them at the neighbor's house, they do their best to help.
Annie related to us that she had awakened in the middle of the night to her father's screams of "Help me, help me." She continued to tell us that she went to investigate and she walked to the door that exited to the carport. At that point, she saw a man walking away with what appeared to be an axe over his shoulder. And she described the person as very tall, with curly hair, and asked, "Was that person as tall as me?" She said, "No, he was taller."
Detectives speak to Larry next, but suddenly the 17-year-old seems nervous. Does he know something about the man Annie saw in the yard?
When we pressed Larry, he said that Michael was 6'4".
Detectives stop cold. Who is Michael?
And very quickly I established that Michael Schwartz was a brother of Larry.
As it turned out, Bob and Kay Swartz had adopted 3 children.
Michael, who was also 17, no longer lived with them, but it wasn't clear why. So at that point, we were very, very eager to talk to Michael.
Coming up, investigators uncover bad blood and dark secrets.
They send him to a state mental hospital.
Detectives uncover startling clues.
Nobody expected anything like this to happen.
It became almost unbelievable.
Was there more than one person with a score to settle?
This person said, I could stick a knife in his back.
We didn't know what we were dealing with.
When they appear to have no suspects in the homicides of Bob and Kay Swartz, police learn the couple's adopted children have an estranged brother.
Both Annie and Larry related to us that Michael no longer lived with them, but had been getting into a lot of trouble.
Detectives are anxious to know more. Could Michael have possibly wanted to harm Bob and Kay?
As we spoke to relatives during the investigation, Michael was quickly identified by them as someone we should look at very closely.
Michael had made threats internally in the house.
Detectives interview the Swartz's friends and family to get more insight into Michael's history. Larry was the Swartz's first adopted child. But long before Annie, Bob and Kay provided Larry with a brother.
Michael was 8 years old when the Swartzes adopted him. The boys were only 6 months apart in age.
The Swartz's second adopted child had arrived at their home, a troubled boy.
As they interviewed everybody, detectives found that Michael's mother abandoned him when he was an infant, and Michael was relinquished to the custody of the state and became a foster child. He went through a series of 6 foster homes before the Swartzes adopted him.
Bob and Kay were determined to turn Michael's life around, but the boy's difficult past wasn't easy to shake, and the problem started almost immediately.
Michael was so antisocial in his approach to life. Michael was having behavioral issues at home, not obeying his parents on a consistent basis, smarting back, profanity.
As the boys grew older, Michael continued to struggle. But that didn't stop Bob and Kay from having high hopes for both their children.
I think Bob and Kay expected Larry and Michael to apply themselves very diligently to their studies and to do well. I think that Larry had a desire to please people. He had kind of a soft-spoken shyness to him. He seemed to want to engage with people. But I think Michael was a challenge from the get-go. I think Michael, he had some deviancies that probably would have precluded anybody from having any type of relationship with him on any level.
2 years after Michael was adopted, Bob and Kay found a new ray of hope when they adopted Annie.
Annie was cute as a button when she arrived. Everybody loved her.
Bob adored Anne. Annie became the apple of her father's eye, and suddenly Annie, the baby, became the favorite child. Everybody in the family loved her.
The more attention Bob gave Annie, the harder he was on his 2 boys. Larry seemed to be able to turn the other cheek, but not Michael.
Michael had been getting into trouble more increasingly over the last year or so.
Michael began to have problems of a fairly serious nature. Tension between he and his father, tension between he and the other family members.
By 1980, Michael's rebellious nature pushed his parents to their breaking point.
One night, Michael asked to go out, and they said no. So he sneaked out. Went out with his buddies. When he came back home at about midnight, he pounds on the door. His mother comes to the door, looks at him and says, "No, we're not letting you in." He goes over to a neighbor's house, spends the night, goes to school the next day on his own. And while he's there, his parents had called. Social services said, we can't handle him anymore.
After 5 years of struggling with Michael, Bob and Kay were so concerned about his volatile behavior that they asked the state to place him with another family.
He never lived at home again.
It was just a very difficult situation. Bob and Kay loved him, but they felt there was nothing they could do for him.
While Bob and Kay tried to stay focused on Larry and Annie, Michael's state of mind seemed to deteriorate.
Michael had been in a reform school, and he got in a fight and got in some trouble, so they sent him to a state mental hospital for evaluation. And that was just a few weeks before the murders. He was staying at this facility.
The Crownsville State Hospital Center was terrifying, faceless, institutional, decrepit buildings, straight out of a Stephen King nightmare.
Had Bob and Kay's rejection led Michael Swartz to commit a cold-blooded murder? Detective Barr and his partner decide to make the short drive to Crownsville and ask Michael for themselves.
He was interrogated by these talented homicide detectives. Michael's denying.
Michael's words say one thing, but to the detectives, his appearance tells a different story.
They did notice it. Michael had very noticeable marks on his long neck, and he clearly had an injury of some kind there. But he said they were hickeys.
Detectives keep pushing, but Michael is adamant that he was at the hospital on the night of the murders, and the hospital records back up his claims.
We learned from the staff that their logs indicated that Michael had been there all evening.
He has what appears to be an ironclad alibi. I mean, he is in a locked ward in a state mental hospital.
The police weren't so sure. A lot of people weren't so sure. It was very lax at this Crownsville State facility. It's not a prison. It's just a hospital.
Detectives aren't completely convinced of Michael's alibi, but they don't have enough to arrest him either. And soon after that interview, Michael Swartz lawyers up.
Of course, I finally got to him. I did what all defense lawyers do, which is to say, don't say a word to anybody about anything. He was never interrogated again.
Michael won't talk, and the lab has found no useful prints on the handle of the splitting maul. But detectives know one key piece of evidence from the crime scene that could tell them everything they need to know.
During the investigation, there was a bloody palm print recovered from the sliding glass door. We had examined both victims. Neither one had blood on the palms.
If detectives can prove Michael Swartz left that print, they'll have their murderer. But that's easier said than done.
This evidence was difficult to analyze. We were very limited in 1984 with what we could do. This would involve the evidence being sent to the FBI laboratory in Washington.
Detectives investigating the savage double murder of Bob and Kay Swartz are hoping one of their most promising pieces of evidence will help them catch the killer.
A bloody palm print was lifted and sent to the FBI laboratory for analysis. We knew that it would probably take a long time to get those results.
While the feds in Washington do their careful work, the shocking news of the murder spreads.
There was a tremendous uproar in the community about this murder. A couple were murdered in their own home. A crazed killer chasing a woman through the neighborhood. There was a lot of pressure to solve the case.
That pressure only mounts when detectives receive the coroner's report. It's a grim account of a seemingly psychotic attack.
The wounds to Mr. Swartz numbered 17 in total, and in fact were lethal. Both his right and left carotid were severed during the attack.
On Kay Swartz, the autopsy showed that she was stabbed 7 times around her neck area, but they were very light wounds, tentative. And then her skull was split, with a mall.
Detectives still haven't been able to locate the knife used in the attack, but the coroner's report does appear to confirm that they're on the right track.
According to the medical examiner, we had the right theory about how this may have occurred. Kay was stabbed in the basement, got up to flee. The killer would have chased Kay Schwartz as she ran from the neighborhood and into the woods, then back to the house where she was killed.
Is it possible Michael Schwartz eluded security at the Crownsville Mental Hospital and committed this crime? If so, detectives need to understand why.
I think it's fair to say there was tension in the house. Bob had a bit of a shorter fuse than Kay and had a little bit less willingness to be tolerant of some of the children's shortcomings.
Neighbors tell detectives a story they remember from a few years before, when Michael was still living with the Schwartzes.
Michael got in trouble for some sin, fighting on a school bus, something like that. And his father decided physical labor was what he needed. So he gave him this heavy wood splitting maul and said, take this stump out of the front yard, the dead tree stump. It was massive, a massive thing. There was no way Michael could get it. But he just swung it again and again and again.
Neighbors told us that Michael chopped at that tree every evening for up to 3 hours, and approaching a month later, the stump was still there. This boy had blisters on his hands.
Michael was seething and getting more and more angry. Everybody said Michael had threatened to kill his parents.
Could the maul that was used to teach Michael Schwartz a lesson have been the same one that ended Kay's life?
Michael told his mother, Kay, that I could walk up to Bob and stick a knife in his back, kill him, and no results would befall me because I'm a juvenile. The logical assumption on all of our parts was Michael had made good on his threat. He had said he would do it, and now he's done it.
"4 days after they were found brutally murdered, Bob and Kay are laid to rest.
The funeral, I had replays of having moments with them. I always admired them. Like, why would somebody kill them?
The couple's obedient children, Larry and Annie Schwartz, have been staying with friends of the family, while their brother still resides at Crownsville.
Michael Schwartz was allowed out of the hospital to come to the funeral, and at the cemetery, both boys stood over the grave and shook holy water, one into Kay's grave, the other into Bob's grave. Off to one side, the two detectives on the case stood in their suits with their sunglasses in the cemetery.
Everyone gathered around, gave them their support. But most people believed it was Michael who had done it.
Many note the suspicious red marks still visible on Michael's neck. Talk spreads through the community.
The newspapers were saying that Michael was a suspect. But even though he was in Crownsville at the time, there was some question about the accountability there, and maybe he could have gotten away and done it.
With lingering concerns over Michael's alibi and the security at Crownsville, detectives decide there's only one way to find the truth, once and for all.
Wanting to make sure that we had crossed every T and dotted every I, my partner and I decided that we were going to follow up and visit that mental hospital again. We wanted to make sure that it was impossible that Michael would never have been able to leave undetected. So we asked the staff to lock us in the ward where Michael was committed. If Michael could have gotten out of that, there was a chance Michael had done it.
Detectives are about to put Michael Schwartz's alibi to the test. by locking themselves in the room where he stayed at the Crownsville Mental Hospital.
If he had killed his parents, Michael would have had to leave undetected, return, and get back in without someone discovering that. And we went through every door and every window, and there was no possible way we could have gotten out of that without help. So it was very convincing to us that Michael was not at the scene of the murder. Michael's been eliminated as a suspect.
It's good news for Michael, but a setback for detectives. The young man was their strongest lead. Undaunted, investigators reach out to the public, hoping to cast a much wider net.
As we conducted our investigation, we methodically went through a list of possible persons that may have intended harm to the Schwartzes. We started a hotline for people to call in tips, and we got phone calls from various neighbors and acquaintances.
One of the many calls that come in immediately piques the detectives' interest.
Persons we interviewed told us that Bob steadfastly picketed an abortion clinic in Annapolis for 4 years. Never missed a Saturday. And he would approach women entering the abortion clinic and attempt to change their mind about what they were going to do.
He would intensely try to dissuade women from coming into the clinic. He would get up in their faces.
Detectives confirmed that a few of those women filed police reports against Bob, so they begin interviewing every complainant and witness connected with those reports.
The police were called on several occasions by the clinic. Bob was never arrested, but he caused the abortion clinic a lot of grief.
Could the killer be someone Bob confronted, or someone with a grudge against Kay?
Kay was a school teacher at Broadneck High School.
In her classroom, she was known for laissez-faire, not a strict disciplinarian.
According to witnesses, Kay was well liked in school. She was an easygoing teacher.
Detectives pursue every credible tip that comes in.
Our investigation revealed that there was no evidence that anyone would have a vendetta against her. In fact, there was no motive that we could establish where anyone would have been that angry or vengeful to want to kill either of them.
"8 days after the brutal double murder, investigators have hit a wall. With no fingerprints on the splitting mall and their single most promising piece of evidence still under analysis, detectives are all out of options. Undaunted, they decide to start fresh, poring over every piece of evidence they do have, starting at the very beginning.
Arundel County Police. Police have someone come to my house. Okay, what is the problem, sir? My parents are dead. You think your parents are dead? Yes.
This time, investigators hone in on something they didn't notice before.
When I listened to the 911 call, Larry Schwartz said, "My parents are dead."
My parents are dead.
However, he told the first police officer on the scene that he hadn't gone downstairs. His father was in the basement. At that point, he was only known that his mother was dead, not his father. So there's an inconsistency there. It didn't make sense.
The discovery leads Detective Barr to take a harder look at Larry's version of events, and he finds several contradictions.
For example, Larry telling us that he saw his mother's body from the window. Yet I looked out the dining room window and couldn't see her body. I thought perhaps he was confused and meant to say the kitchen window, which turned out to be even worse. I climbed on the kitchen counter and looked out the window and still couldn't see her body.
Detective Barr had chalked it up to the extreme shock the boy had suffered that morning.
Larry's demeanor wasn't unusual at the time. Various people react differently under stress. He could have very well been in shock, repressing his feelings. I didn't know.
Barr wants to give Larry a chance to clear up his story. But that isn't going to happen.
Larry had gotten an attorney. The attorney had advised him not to talk to us.
At last, word comes in from the FBI. Test results on their key piece of evidence from the crime scene. The bloody palm print on the sliding glass door. The one detectives believed was made by the killer.
It came back. Finally, we could find out who it could possibly belong to, what we were dealing with.
Coming up, it's a twist that no one saw coming.
A chill just went up my spine. It just didn't seem right.
Detectives working to catch Bob and Kay Schwartz's killer finally had the results of their key piece of crime scene evidence from the FBI's forensic lab in Washington, D.C.
I was notified by the FBI laboratory that they had positively identified the bloody palm print recovered from the sliding glass door.
The results confirm what detectives believed months earlier. The palm print belongs to one of Bob and Kay's own children, but not the child they suspected.
It came back belonging to Larry Schwartz. At that point, the state's attorney for Anne Arundel County authorized an arrest warrant be obtained for Larry Schwartz.
Authorities charged young Schwartz as an adult with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
When the news gets out, it causes an uproar in Cape St. Clair. Michael Schwartz was known as the bad kid in the family, not handsome, likable Larry.
A chill just went up my spine. It just didn't seem right. I didn't have a single suspicion.
It was very difficult to accept that Larry had that type of violence within him.
Larry was seen as this model, mild-mannered son. Nobody in a million years would have expected him to commit one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Annapolis.
The community was in denial. The majority of them were convinced that Michael Schwartz had done this. There was certainly a lot of speculation about whether we had the right person or not.
It was very hard for people to believe that he could have done it. I think that they just felt there was more to this. There was more going on than any of us could understand.
Why would a docile youth, beloved by everybody, explode in a rage and stab both his parents? Why? Everybody wanted to know the answer.
Authorities want answers too. But Larry, at the direction of the defense team hired by concerned family friends, is not talking and has neither admitted nor denied guilt. So for the next 15 months, while Larry waits it out in jail, detectives spend every waking moment trying to build an airtight case.
We lacked a confession. The state's attorney for Anne Arundel County had me reassigned to his office to work exclusively on this case. We had to make sure that we had every piece of evidence we could get to close this case.
Without Larry's confession, detectives need to find out what led this soft-spoken boy to such violent extremes.
I continued to interview people, collect statements.
Investigators soon realized that Michael wasn't the only son who had a hard time at home.
I believe that Larry was under tremendous pressure. He was repeatedly chastised for the poor grades. He was restricted from leaving the yard.
I think it was more of a protection thing. You're trying to keep him away from the wrong crowd. And I think Larry could have been pulled in many ways. I think they were afraid of that.
I believe personally that he was angry. He was frustrated. It was cumulative, that he was holding rage inside him. And whatever may have happened that night set him off.
But some speculated that there was another reason why Larry turned on his parents.
Michael kept contact with Larry. He changed Larry's view of the family, and in a negative way. He was telling him that they just got rid of me, they want nothing to do with me, you know. Larry, he didn't want to be left like that. He didn't want to go into foster home again.
Larry was extremely worried that what happened to Michael would happen to him.
Then it changed where he was afraid he was going to be put out.
Despite what may have led to this violent act, 17-year-old Larry Swartz is about to be tried for first-degree murder.
15 months after the crimes, the prosecutor had witnesses ready to line up, psychiatric witnesses who said Larry was sane and he knew what he was doing and he actually planned it. And they had a case to present that showed premeditated, cold-blooded murder.
Larry Swartz looked unconcerned as he arrived this morning from the county jail where he had spent the last 15 months.
More than 60 witnesses have been subpoenaed to testify at Larry Swartz's trial, which is expected to last 2 weeks.
I was at the courthouse expecting a trial. There was no trial. Nobody expected anything like this to happen. It was shocking.
After detectives and prosecutors have labored more than a year preparing their case against Larry Swartz for the murder of his parents, a last-minute maneuver by Swartz's legal team has brought everything to an unexpected screeching halt. The trial is called off.
Larry had confessed to his attorneys.
He broke down. He broke down sobbing and heaving, and he said he did it, he was guilty, and he just killed them.
Finally, authorities have their confession, leaving behind any doubt of Larry's guilt.
Ultimately, the expected killer hadn't done it. The unexpected killer had done it.
Now, the state's attorney's office has to decide what punishment could possibly fit this crime.
The state agreed to a plea of second-degree murder.
The prosecutor recommended a 20-year sentence with all but 12 suspended. The judge agreed to make it concurrent as opposed to consecutive. I've never seen a case that lenient.
The state's attorney wanted me to take Larry to the confinement facility. He knew that if I took Larry, there was a potential for Larry to tell me why he did this and how did it really occur. And I sat down with him and asked him to tell us, Larry, why did you do it? He didn't answer me. And I pressed him again, and he said, I just lost it. He said that he had come home from school that day, and later in the evening, his mother had asked him how he had done on his tests. And he knew that he had failed Spanish, and she had been writing him about not doing well in school. And she made a caustic remark about his grades, you probably failed them, meaning the tests. So he took a knife and he stabbed her repeatedly about the neck. And then Bob was alerted to the activity, the noise, and he attacked Bob. Larry never did explain or admit to chasing Kay through the neighborhood. I found out during the autopsy that she had been stabbed through her esophagus, so perhaps she couldn't scream. With sheer terror, running for her life, Larry did admit to putting the splitting maul into his mother's head.
After committing such a violent act, Larry knew there was only one way to cast off suspicion.
Colorado County Police.
We came to the realization that throughout the interview with Larry, he was trying to steer our investigation. He force-fed us information about Michael.
The whole time that his brother Michael was a suspect in the killings, Larry played the victim card.
When we were here for the funeral, Larry wanted to hang out with us, essentially, which we were perfectly prepared to do, not believing for a minute that he was involved. We viewed him as a victim, a kid who didn't have any parents at this point in time. It's, to this day, hard to fathom.
Though Larry's adoptive brother Michael had been exonerated, he nonetheless met with a tragic end.
When it turned out that he didn't commit the murders, he had nowhere to go. His parents are dead. His brother's in prison. His sister's been adopted by another family, and he has no one in the world. He starts doing drugs. And while he's taking drugs, he and his buddies go rob a man, and in the course of robbing the man, they stabbed him to death. Michael is sentenced to prison for life. None of the leniency his brother got. Life. He's now in his 50s, still in prison in the state of Maryland, 35 years later.
This just had to be one of the worst lose-lose, destructive situations that society can see happen.
Looking back over this case, I have empathy for both Michael and Larry. I know that they struggled, yet the parents still tried to do the right thing.
Kay and Bob had adopted children who had been through a lot of bad times. And so I think they were trying to heal the wounds that they came to the family with.
For both Michael and Larry, I could understand the frustration, the anger, but I couldn't understand the murder. That's the part I didn't understand.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to Oxygen.com. A vibrant young woman with a bright future.
She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty, but also very smart.
Is the victim of a truly disturbing murder.
He'd been struck on the head many times.
It's kind of the horror story.
The body itself appeared to have been washed. Jewelry had been put on her after the fact.
She had been staged for this suspect's desires. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her?
Detectives hunt for a deranged killer.
We noticed bloodied palm print.
Police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
We could be looking for a serial killer.
Just when it looks like justice may never be served.
It was extremely frustrating.
A stunning discovery points to a murderer in their midst.
When we found out who it was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Less than an hour outside Los Angeles, Irvine, California is a peaceful community with a coastal vibe.
Irvine is very, very pretty. It is pretty much the hub of Orange County. The ocean's only 10 minutes away, and this is where everybody wanted to be.
Irvine has always been considered to be a very safe city and has not been known for violence.
On May 14th, 1979, Irvine's sense of safety is shattered when a man calls 911 to say he can't get a hold of his 22-year-old girlfriend, Savannah Anderson.
Earlier that day, her boyfriend went over to her residence to meet her at about 6 o'clock. He couldn't get any response at the door.
He went back home for a while, couldn't get a hold of her still.
He called the police department about 7:25 p.m. It was a welfare check. Her boyfriend indicated that she had not been feeling well, and so there was a concern that it could be a health issue. When the officer arrived, he met her boyfriend, Bill Mills, and another man, Ken Bergenson, who identified himself as her boss.
They explained they'd both come to the apartment to try to find out if she was okay because nobody had been able to get a hold of her that day.
I was very fortunate to work with Savannah. Savannah was always prompt, and she didn't come that day. All day long, it was like trying to get a hold of her, no answers. By the end of the day, we were very concerned something might have happened because that wasn't like her.
The officer found the apartment was in fact locked up tight. There was no key available from the apartment office. The officer found out that a bedroom window nearby was unlocked from the inside. He was able to open that bedroom window.
When the officer made entry, he was able to see a woman with a lot of blood around her, lying in bed, towels wrapped around her face and head. She was cold to the touch.
Both Savannah's boyfriend and boss are taken to the station for questioning, while homicide investigators are called to the scene.
When I walked in, it appeared to me that there was a struggle, a fight, and it was very clear that she was attacked on the bed, and she laid on the bed for some time due to the amount of blood that had pooled in that area. A lot of blood splattering against the back of the wall and the headboard.
She also had towels over her face. After the towels were taken off, her face was found out to be beaten very severely, excessively.
The towels were significant. It tells you that the killer may have known her and didn't want to look at what they've done.
It appeared that the body of the victim had been beaten with something hard.
She had multiple defensive marks on her arms, her hands, nail marks around the neck area, which would indicate that she also had a ligature that had been placed around her neck.
The legs were slightly raised as if some sexual activity may have occurred there.
Perhaps she was the victim of a sexual assault.
The degree of violence to Savannah's body was unusual. Did somebody do it because they were angry at her? If they were angry at her, is that because they knew her, they loved her, they hated her?
Based on the state of the body, police believe Savannah was likely killed in the early hours of the morning. Looking closer, several details strike investigators as highly unusual.
Savannah had some jewelry on her. There was a necklace around her neck, and the clasp was at the front. There's also a watch on her arm that looked like it had just been put on there loosely.
We were surprised to see that those items were still intact on her based upon the brutality of her attacker. So it appeared that he may have just put those items back on her.
The body itself appeared to have been washed, as there's very little blood on the skin surface of the victim.
We noticed drag marks from the bed onto the carpet leading into the bathroom. Inside the bathroom, there was diluted blood with water around the sink area and also the bathtub.
She looked like she had been cleaned up and set in a particular position on the bed that was staged for this suspect's desires. And I think that was important to get an idea of what this type of person was willing to do to Savannah's body, put things on her, put clothes on her, whatever.
It was very unusual for any type of murder, in my opinion. It looks like somebody wanted to make it look like she was fine and nothing was wrong.
Police find some important clues the killer left behind.
We noticed bloodied palm print leading from the bedroom into the bathroom. Palm prints are identifiable just like fingerprints. There were smudged, bloodied fingerprints on the toilet seat.
They were basically the only way that we'd be able to find out who the killer might have been. There was no DNA at the time.
Detectives find no murder weapon or any sign of forced entry.
We made the determination that the killer may have been known by Savannah and let him in through the front door. Another theory was through an unlocked open window.
After finishing up at the scene, detectives break the news of Savannah's death to her loved ones.
The parents lived in Utah. When I spoke to Savannah's mother on the phone, she was devastated by this. It was her only child. It's probably hard for most people to realize, first of all, what it's like to lose a child, let alone the only child you have. Savannah's mother said Savannah had made a collect call to her about 10 o'clock the previous day on Mother's Day evening. They had talked on the phone for about 2 hours. Savannah was very happy, good mood. That must have made it even more so difficult.
When I found out what had happened to Savannah, we were all totally shocked. My heart just hurt so much. How very sad this beautiful young lady, her life was gone. It's very senseless, very, very hard to understand.
Born in 1956, Savannah Anderson grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and had big dreams.
She was 22 when she moved to Irvine. She came here looking for a better opportunity. She was very independent, and she wanted to do it on her own. I met Savannah when she was working here for Commercial Credit. Savannah was a secretary for the operations manager. She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty. I remember when people did come in the office, especially the men, she did attract attention.
Savannah was flattered, but she did have a boyfriend, Bill Mills, whom she met 3 months after moving to California.
She was more of a private person into herself as far as not one to just open up and tell everybody what she was doing. She was definitely on the shy side. When I found out what had happened to Savannah, I felt angry and just crushed and so hurt. My first thought was just how tragic this was. I just can't imagine.
It's kind of the horror story. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody close to her, somebody who knows her, somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her? When you have a brutal killing like Savannah's case, detectives immediately looked for the people that are close to her, her boyfriend.
The fact that Bill, the boyfriend, was the one that called the police, is he innocently calling the police here because he doesn't know that something had happened to her? Or is he the one who may have done it, so he contacted the police to say, gee, something might be wrong, with the hopes that the police will go ahead and discover the crime, and then say, well, it can't be the boyfriend because he called us here. Could it be almost a way out to try to point the finger away from you? It's just something you have to look into.
Coming up, police question the grieving boyfriend to see if he has something to hide.
His attorney advised him not to take a polygraph.
And detectives uncover more suspects.
Why is he here now at this time? That was suspicious.
Somebody was lying.
Another crime turns the investigation on its head.
This individual was responsible for 5 murders. Perhaps she was the victim of this killer.
And the perpetrator's identity leaves everyone in shock.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of 22-year-old Savannah Anderson have their first suspect, her boyfriend, Bill Mills.
When you have a crime of passion where somebody is murdered, there are definitely times when a boyfriend who just got angry and upset did the crime.
The first thing we did was began meeting with Bill Mills so we could understand better about Savannah, his relationship.
Bill tells police he and Savannah started dating 6 months ago, and he was in love.
They had met each other in another apartment community. They had gotten along well.
He was about 9 years older than Savannah. in talking with him, had learned that he had just asked her to marry him.
Police are curious if something came up to disrupt the couple's plans for the future.
It was a large, violent crime scene. Did he do it because he was angry at her?
Bill tells investigators he last saw Savannah a day earlier on May 13th.
They had brunch together, and then he spent the day over at her apartment. During the interview with Bill Mills, we found out that Savannah and he did have sex that day. So that would be important later on in case there was semen found inside of her.
Bill told me on the 13th he left her apartment at about 10 p.m.
Once he did leave, what happened to him? Could anybody account for his activity after he apparently left her apartment?
He said he went home, he went to bed, and then to work the following day.
Bill says he and Savannah had plans on the 14th after they both got off work.
He went to her apartment about 6, knocked, couldn't raise her. He went back home for a while, then Bill Mills went ahead and contacted the police department.
Bill denies having anything to do with Savannah's death.
It appeared that Bill Mills was really in love with her, thought it was a very serious relationship. He was very happy with her.
Bill was cooperative. He tried to assist us as much as he could.
But there is one request Bill won't comply with.
There is a red flag. He was asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph. He contacted an attorney, and his attorney advised him not to take one.
We did ask if we could see his body, his hands, his arms, see if there's any indications of a struggle with anybody. But his body was clean. We asked him if we could go ahead and take his finger and palm prints. He agreed to let us do that.
It will be weeks before the results come in. In the meantime, detectives are forced to let Bill go. Next, they move on to another man in Savannah's life.
Part of the investigation and process was to meet with her boss, Ken Bergeson, who had been at the crime scene. In speaking with him, he said he had known her in Salt Lake and had offered her a job locally here.
Ken Bergeson also said that he kind of considered himself a father figure to her. He helped her move. They had talked many times, been out for drinks, been out for lunch and different things.
Could Ken have wanted more than a professional relationship with Savannah?
Was anything going on romantically in the present day?
I asked Ken where he was the night of May 13th, and he indicated that he was with his wife that whole evening.
We did contact the wife to verify that, and there's no reason to believe that he was anywhere but at his home that night.
After the interview, we asked Ken to submit his prints so they could be compared against the crime scene.
We just let him go home that night after the interview.
The police questioned each one of us in the office. I worked for Ken Bergeson at the time. He was just such a nice guy and so concerned about her. She was living by herself, and she was just so beautiful. I just thought, somebody saw her. Somebody was either stalking her or something happened. But I was just so angry that somebody could possibly do something like this. It had to have been somebody I thought who was very sick.
There was nothing really that drew anyone's attention to any issues that Savannah had at work, and nothing came of it.
Police canvassed the apartment complex the next day, searching for witnesses.
We didn't find anyone that said that they'd heard any struggle or screams to corroborate when that attack may have occurred. There were 2 security guards that were assigned to the complex. It was a multi-unit under construction.
So after I got the names of the security personnel who worked that night, which was about a week after we originally responded out there, I talked to the security guard first who worked the midnight to 6:30 shift. His name was Chuck Doyle.
According to Doyle, security was hired to ensure the residents were safe and to overlook any construction sites and that sort of thing for theft.
Chuck tells investigators on a usual shift he would drive through the complex and also patrol by foot.
I asked him how he found out about the murder of the woman, and he said he found out through the company. I asked him if he knew the lady who lived there, showed him 2 pictures, and he picked out the picture of Savannah Anderson.
When asked about his dealings with Savannah, Chuck's answer gives investigators cause for concern.
He indicated about a month prior that he'd helped Savannah gain entry into her apartment and slid a window open for her.
It was notable that Mr. Doyle had said he was aware that at least at that time one of the windows was unlocked.
Doyle said, "You'll find my fingerprints on Savannah's window, and this is the reason why." Immediately, we printed him. It really made me zero in on him as a potential suspect.
A week after Savannah Anderson was found bludgeoned to death in her bed, security guard Chuck Doyle has drawn suspicion after admitting that his fingerprints are likely on her unlocked window.
She had locked herself out of her apartment before, contacted him while he was on the site to see if he could help her get into the apartment. The security did not have any pass keys. He found that a window was unlocked. He was able to slide the window open. He also said that he didn't go inside. That could be for a couple of reasons. Could be perfectly innocent that he didn't go inside. Could also be to say, well, I didn't go inside if he may have somehow be involved in the death.
Had Chuck slipped in through the same unlocked window to kill Savannah? Police press him for his movements that night.
Chuck Doyle said that he reported for duty on the 14th at midnight, or was supposed to, indicated that he was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes late.
He was supposed to replace a security guard named Bob Sellers.
He drove by Savannah's and saw her talking on the phone. He thought maybe that was around 12:15 or so, 12:20, but was not certain.
He went and parked next to Bob Sellers' car. About 12:30, he estimated, Sellers approached. He got daily reports from Sellers, and then Sellers went ahead and got in his car and drove off.
When detectives ask what happened next, Chuck's answer raises even more suspicion.
He said he drove around a while, went back to the carport, and went to sleep, which would seem very odd.
He thought he probably nodded off for a while.
Doyle says that he was awoken by a car door slam. It was Sellers who had returned and invited him to breakfast. Doyle says it was maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. They went to breakfast at Spire's restaurant, a 24-hour cafe.
The cafe is just 10 minutes from the complex.
Doyle said that he was dropped off by Sellers at about 2:30 in the morning.
Chuck says the rest of his shift was uneventful, and he clocked out at 6:30 a.m.
There's just something really unusual about the sequence of events that's being described by Doyle.
Investigators are left with more questions than answers. Did Savannah die on Chuck's watch? Or was he the one who killed her? Hoping for clarity and to corroborate Chuck's story, they turn to the other security guard, Robert Sellers.
Robert Sellers enlisted into the Marine Corps at age 17. He's 22 now.
He was assigned that day to work from about 4 in the afternoon, and he was supposed to get off at about midnight that night. I asked him if he knew who Savannah Anderson was. He said he had talked to both her and her boyfriend that evening.
Sellers told me that he thought he saw Savannah around 10 p.m. on the phone.
Robert confirms that Chuck was late for work, so he didn't leave the apartment complex until around 12:30 a.m.
After leaving Doyle, he then went home, showered.
As a U.S. Marine, he was supposed to go to a Marine base. At 6 o'clock in the morning,
he decided it wasn't worth trying to go to sleep, so he thought, well, I'll just go out to breakfast with Doyle. So that's when he returned.
Sellers told me that he came back to the complex about 3:30, which is an hour and a half or 2 hours after what Doyle recalled this happening. So there was this inconsistency between the both of them about what time they must have gone to the restaurant. Sellers said there's a waitress named Gail who waited on him. I took note of that. At the end of the Sellers interview, we asked if he would go ahead and give us finger palm prints, which he agreed to.
Investigators hope the autopsy report can help them pinpoint Savannah's time of death.
According to the coroner's report, Savannah Anderson died at approximately 2 a.m. on May 14th. The cause of death was strangulation.
She'd been struck on the head many times, found multiple contusions on her face. There was broken fingernails, a broken jaw, cracked teeth.
We did have biological fluids, semen that was found, but DNA was not in existence at the time, so we didn't have that tool.
My first thought was just how horrible to die like that. I cried and I was just very upset just thinking that something like that had happened to a person that was just so lovely. It was just terrible.
If Savannah was killed at 2 a.m., which security guard is telling the truth? Was Chuck really off-site like he claimed? Or was Robert right, meaning Chuck was at the apartment complex when the murder took place?
There was a wide gap and discrepancy between their two stories and timing. So the two were brought in together to try and determine if someone was mistaken about times.
They both basically stuck to their stories. I wasn't sure which either timeline might have been correct, whether it might have been Doyle's or Sellers, because they were just too far apart. So we thought at that time somebody was lying.
Detectives are investigating the disturbing murder of Savannah Anderson. The two security guards from her apartment complex are unable to agree where they were at 2 a.m. when Savannah was killed.
The timing is very sketchy between what Doyle says and what we learned from Sellers.
This is raising a lot of flags to me because why don't they know where they were and what time they were?
Going over time discrepancies, Doyle said, well, I slept, I could be mistaken, I'm not sure. So Sellers seemed to be more credible time-wise.
According to Robert Sellers, Chuck was on duty at 2 a.m., and the pair only went to Spire's restaurant around 3:30 a.m.
I asked one of the patrol guys to go ahead and try to contact any waitress there that might have been named Gail to see if she recalled the security guys coming in there at all. They weren't able to find a Gail that worked at the Spire's restaurant, so we could not identify that particular part of the story. It looked like the best chance of us determining who the suspect was going to be through the fingerprint and palm print evidence left behind. At this time, we already had fingerprints and palm prints from the boyfriend, Bill Mills, the boss, Ken Bergerson, and from the two security guards, Chuck Doyle and Bob Sellers. And I felt that if we can find out if any of those were the palm prints, that's going to be the resolution of our case. We'd be able to determine who had done it. So we sent them away with high hopes that we're going to be able to resolve the case once we get the results back.
While waiting for the results, investigators dig deeper into Savannah's life, hoping something will point to her killer.
Savannah seemed to be a very likable person who had, from all reports, a good mind, good IQ, personable, funny, one that you would be very happy to have as a daughter.
She was very sweet, very sophisticated, quiet. She had very strong values and morals. You know, she was just not one of those that was going to be out looking for trouble. Just how she went and how young she went is so tragic. Our world is, it's cruel.
We interviewed neighbors. Savannah had been at the apartment complex about 6 weeks. Her contacts, friends were very limited. What I learned through investigation was Savannah had moved deliberately for the safety of having security on the premises.
She really wanted a place that felt safe, and the fact that they had security, she loved that aspect of it. She felt really good about where she was going.
2 months after Savannah's death, police received the results of the finger and palm print analysis from the scene.
I was really hoping we heard back from the crime lab that it's going to be one of the guys we'd already talked to.
In terms of identification and finding and identifying that individual, it was everything.
None of the prints that came back were any of the fingerprints submitted from the bloody finger and palm prints. Really disappointing. Couldn't figure out why. It seemed like there should have been somebody in there that was responsible for it, yet the crime lab is telling us that these weren't the responsible parties at all. We thought we had some viable suspect, but we're told, nope, it's not them. Well, now what? Wow.
The results mean Savannah's boyfriend, her boss, and the 2 security guards are all cleared.
I was very discouraged, but thought, okay, we just haven't come across the perpetrator. He's out there. We'll find him. We'll identify him. I feel comfortable with that based on the palm print.
Detectives immediately looked for people in the area that maybe had criminal histories. They looked at people that had been arrested after that for similar type of break-in crimes. And if they had any suspicions whatsoever, they would get their palm print and their fingerprints, and they'd compare them to the crime scene prints and then rule them out if they didn't match.
3 months after the crime, police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
The palm prints didn't match. It was extremely frustrating to work through this.
With the case threatening to turn cold, detectives refused to quit and take the case in a chilling new direction.
After going through potential suspects that were eliminated through the palm print, we began to examine that Savannah Anderson may be the victim of a serial killer known as the Bedroom Basher. This individual was responsible for 5 murders in the Orange County area at the time.
With a population under 2 million people, the number of attacks in a matter of months is troubling, and the similarities striking.
He would target young lone females between 17 and 35, ground floor apartments, open windows, open doors. Once inside, he would bludgeon, strangle, and sexually assault the females. So Savannah certainly fit that MO, and so we had to take a real strong look at perhaps she was the victim of this individual who had not been identified. We could be looking for a serial killer.
Detectives investigating the brutal murder of Savannah Anderson now believe she may have fallen victim to a serial killer.
Bedroom Basher went after females in homes or apartments in the Orange County area, raped them, in at least one case, killed somebody by bludgeoning them, which is what happened to Savannah.
Based upon the number of bludgeonings in Orange County, which were 5, we felt that there would be another that would take place.
5 months after Savannah's murder, investigators' worst fears are confirmed when the serial killer strikes again.
During this time, there was a woman in Orange County that had been attacked, believed by the Bedroom Basher, who survived and was able to give a description to the police. A composite drawing was made. She described the perpetrator as a male, olive skin, pockmarked face, long hair, mustache, dark eyes, in his late 20s, early 30s. A task force was created in Orange County. Flyers were disseminated to the public and to patrol units. It resulted in multiple contacts of people who believed they knew who this individual was. Unfortunately, none of those resulted in the apprehension of the individual.
A year after the murder, with no arrests and a killer on the loose, women in the area live in a constant state of terror.
The community was definitely impacted by this terrible murder. The news was full of these kind of things, and it did create fear among people. The fact that I was living so close by, it's a little scary.
Any female who resided by themselves took extra precautions to ensure that their windows, doors were in fact locked. Every possibility we looked at, we were unable to make any headway in determining what happened to Savannah Anderson. It was extremely frustrating. There was no one else that we were aware of that could provide any insight and/or potentially could be a suspect.
3 years after Savannah's murder, her case remains unsolved.
After you go through tips, leads, you step back, you re-examine, you say, what did I miss? It's got to be there. What did I miss?
I've started to believe that they just weren't going to find out. And that's terrible to think that something like that could happen and that this person is out there roaming around still.
2 more years pass until a rookie homicide detective takes a renewed interest in the case.
Savannah's case was the first cold case that I ever worked. I was familiar with it because I was in patrol when it happened, and I thought, well, nobody's looked at it for a while. Maybe I should look at it.
A friend of mine who knows Larry Montgomery very well calls him the evidence whisperer.
I was aware he was looking at the Savannah Anderson case, and at one point he came to me and we compared notes on it.
After combing through all the evidence, detectives revisit whether Savannah was a victim of the still unidentified bedroom basher.
The possibility that she was killed by a serial killer was definitely looked at. I was looking at anything that I could use to direct me to a possible suspect. I'm looking at what was done at the crime scene. What did the suspect do with the body? What was maybe in his mind because of what he did?
In comparing Savannah's murder to those committed by the bedroom basher, something just doesn't add up.
The one thing that stood out that was not similar was the cleaning up of the victim.
When I look at a crime scene like this, it's somebody who has a desire for Savannah. She appeared uninjured other than towels on top of her face. It wasn't the gore that he liked. He had to kill her in order to get her into a position where he could fantasize about having an actual relationship with her. This is a real girl now as opposed to a dead body. The question in this case is, who did it? All the people we've looked at and that looked good were not matching the prints. There was one point where I started looking at the security guards to see what they were doing because they were certainly involved in being there at the time. There were very big differences between what Doyle said happened and what Sellers said happened that night. And I thought that was very odd.
I thought at the time that I interviewed Doyle that one of the problems was he may have gone to sleep for a while. That would certainly account for the timeline being different or his uneasiness in talking to us about that particular time period.
Police quickly locate Chuck and bring him in for another interview. His story about what happened the night of the murder is the same, but a few details stand out.
Doyle said that he got to the site probably 10 minutes late. He had not been able to find the person he was supposed to replace yet, Bob Sellers. About 12:30, Doyle saw Sellers come with a shirt in his hand, and I asked Doyle, did you ever ask him why he was late or why he didn't have his uniform shirt on? He said, no, he never asked him that. He just figures he's on his own time, so he could probably wear whatever he wants.
That's unusual. That right there's a big red flag.
That's not the only thing that raises alarm bells.
Doyle said that Sellers had commented about wanting to have a drink with Savannah. He thought she was very attractive.
Detectives asked Chuck Doyle if Robert Sellers ever confided anything else to him.
Regarding the relationship between Doyle and Sellers, they weren't buddies. They didn't do things together. They weren't really close friends.
Following this lead, investigators asked Chuck if it was common for them to go for breakfast during a shift, like they did the night of the murder.
They never did that before, so why is Sellers there on a night when he's supposed to leave soon to go to work at a Marine base, saying, hey, you want to go get something to eat? It didn't seem to fit, but I had the paperwork that shows that he had been exonerated. It wasn't his print, but I saw all kinds of things that Sellers did that was suspicious. Why is he here now at this time? It all fits if he came back and did something with the body at that time. It all made sense time-wise. And that's when I decided we need to find those prints again and see if we matched them properly.
Five years after Savannah Anderson was found murdered in her apartment, cold case investigators suspect her killer has been hiding in plain sight the entire time.
I've got a suspicion that this guy, Robert Sellers, might be the guy because there's too many lies or mistakes. He's already been exonerated, and I didn't believe the exoneration. We need to find somebody who's better than our sheriff's department, who's best in the world that we can get.
Robert's prints and the ones found at the crime scene are rushed to FBI headquarters.
The FBI discovered that some parts of the palm print were so thick with blood that it became a negative. It was the opposite of what it should be because of the thick blood. The thick blood looked like the ridges when really they were the valleys of the print.
The FBI reanalyzed the palm print and compared it to prints obtained from Robert.
The next day, the fingerprint lab at the FBI was able to identify in about 24 points of identification a positive identification of security guard Bob Sellers.
We have to arrest him now. Sellers, at the time that he was arrested, was living in a mobile home up in Brea at the police department. He was presented with evidence that his prints are, in fact, in the blood there. He didn't come forward right away, but very quickly, after he had some lies, he did admit that he did everything that we thought he did.
He was obsessed with her. He found her very attractive. He thought perhaps by going into her apartment that he might convince her of some romantic get-together. He gained entry into her apartment through an unlocked window where he could hear her on the telephone talking with her mother. He stayed in the bedroom hid as best possible while she talked in the kitchen living room area. Once she got off the phone at about a little after 12, she came into the bedroom. When she saw him, she was thinking, I have an intruder, a man in here, and I'm frightened. And he became frightened and realized that he had to silence her. He pulled out his baton and began striking her. He then went to strangulation.
During the struggle with Savannah, he said that his shirt got bloody, so he had to take it off. So when he went to see Doyle, he had his shirt in his hand so that his replacement would not see the blood on it.
And then he goes home, gets cleaned up, sneaks back in, and then goes into Savannah's apartment. Sellers wanted her sexually. He had to kill her to get that. He did talk about he wanted her to be clean, and so that's why he drug her into the shower and washed the blood off of her and took her back into the bedroom and wrapped her head in towels because she was so badly beaten. So then he just had a body that was clean and he could have his fantasy. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he's trying to sneak out, and that's when Doyle sees him, and that's when, at the spur of the moment, he has to all of a sudden pretend like, oh, I'm here to go to breakfast with you, okay? He almost seemed relieved when he finally was able to confess that he actually did kill Savannah.
On March 29th, 1984, Robert Sellers is charged with murder, rape, attempted rape, and burglary.
I think after 5 years, he thought he probably did get away with it. In that time, he got married, started a family. The anguish that he caused with Savannah Anderson's death, he didn't deserve having that extra 5 years.
On November 4th, 1986, Robert Sellers is found guilty of first-degree murder and a special circumstance of rape. But his lawyers win his appeal.
His conviction was overturned on a technicality. The fact that the prosecution could not prove that she was alive during the rape changed the verdict for a life without possibility of parole.
Instead of a retrial, prosecutors offer Robert a deal. He accepts to avoid the death penalty and pleads guilty to first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Here you have a guard, a man, a Marine, placed there to protect the residents, and it turned out he is the one committing the crime. One would not expect the one who is protecting you to be your killer.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was. The irony of it all was the fact that she moved to this beautiful apartment complex thinking she was going to be safe and secure. And it was the security guard that actually did it. It was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Authorities don't find anything to link Robert Sellers to the bedroom basher killings. In 1996, Gerald Parker was identified and convicted of those crimes. In 1999, Robert Sellers died in prison.
I do feel there was justice, especially when I found out that he died after he had been in prison. That was justice right there. When I remember Savannah, I think of this beautiful young woman, just the prettiest smile. She was very, very poised. I think she would have definitely had a bright future had her life not been taken in any sense of the manner, whether she had married and had a family or gone on in the business world. She just was a very lovely person.
A young woman with a big heart.
She was the most compassionate, caring, captivating person I've ever met. She was in a very good place in her life.
Murdered in a terrifying attack.
Somebody set the body on fire and left. Her last few minutes of life was pure hell.
Detectives discover a secret affair.
They had started to develop more of a relationship.
We told him straight up, you're the killer, and we're going to have your DNA.
Then uncover a surprising suspect hunting for prey.
The night that she was murdered, she had answered a call.
There was a note. The directions were to a fictitious place.
He was trying to trick young women.
A second tragedy sparks terror in the community.
We may be dealing with a serial killer.
I lived in fear. I was terrified to go out at night.
Before a calculating killer is ultimately revealed.
This is not real. This can't be happening. This is crazy.
Just 90 minutes from the bright lights of Nashville, Tullahoma, Tennessee is a quaint city full of Southern charm.
Tullahoma is a very small town. Everybody knows everybody. Your teachers at the high school are the same teachers that taught your grandparents. The community is very close-knit.
The people there are genuine. It's a safe place to live. We don't have a lot of violent crime.
In the early morning of July 2nd, 2012, a grisly crime is discovered that sets the whole town on edge.
I got the call that a couple of younger people were driving down a very, very rural road, and they seen a fire. They were going to put the fire out, but when they went over there, they noticed that it was a body that was on fire and called 911. When I arrived at the scene, several other investigators were there and said, this is real bad. It appeared that foul play was involved. We wasn't sure that she was murdered at this spot. It appeared that somebody may have just pulled over or backed up, dumped the body, set the body on fire, and left.
There were some tire tracks. We couldn't plaster cast them because they were in gravel. I just kind of surveyed what we had. There was no evidentiary value. Where do we go from here?
First responders extinguish the fire, and investigators take a closer look at the scene.
As we worked our way closer to the body, you started to get a sense of, how horrible this actually was.
It's just like something you would see off of a movie. This is not real. This can't be happening. This is crazy. The victim was a young white female, possibly in her 20s.
There was star tattoos behind each one of her ears.
And there was a magnolia leaf tattoo. I remember she had a shirt on. It had something to do with the nursing technical school. She was undressed from the waist down. Body was partially burned and covered in soot. The fire was relegated to her pelvic area.
It led us to believe that there had been a sexual assault. Someone had obviously tried to burn the evidence up.
Her body was already in rigor. I would believe that she was deceased at the time of the fire.
What was very glaring was blunt force trauma to her head.
You could actually feel the broken bones in the skull.
Detectives immediately attempt to identify the young victim.
There was no purse, no cell phone, no license, no vehicle to help us identify who the victim was.
Investigators speak to the couple who made the 911 call.
They didn't know who the person was. They didn't see or hear anyone. It was obvious almost immediately. They didn't have anything to do with this homicide. It was very traumatic for them. They just couldn't believe it.
At the scene, I made the suggestion to put what information we had on social media to help us identify her.
Within a few short hours, local mother of four, Kelly Sharpton, sees the missing persons report posted online.
Mom was at work, and there was a post about a young girl that had been found. When she came across the section that said she had star tattoos, I was told that Mom screamed out in the middle of her office. And then, of course, she called the sheriff's office.
She introduced herself, and we started talking, and the description seemed similar. The tattoos seemed to match.
Kelly instantly heads down to the police station for a formal interview.
When we interviewed Kelly, she was distraught. She was crying, and she identified the body in Todd's office on pictures. The victim was her daughter, Megan Sharpton.
I walked in, and I immediately heard my mom sobbing, and I can still hear her to this day. She just said somebody killed her last night. And it took me a second to figure out what she had just said, and then it hit me that she was gone.
24-year-old Megan Sharpton was a bright young woman with a big heart.
She was genuine. She was the most compassionate, caring, captivating person I've ever met. She and I were really, really, really close. She had the best laugh. She was so fun.
I could count on Megan to do anything for me. I knew she was always there. She was absolutely hilarious, very bold, but at the same time, you could tell she didn't want to be the center of attention.
Regardless of who you were, where you were from, she didn't care. She really, truly cared for every single person.
Megan had decided to turn her caring nature into a career.
She was working herself, through nursing school. Megan would have been an amazing nurse. She had her head on straight and was, ready to get going with her career.
Along with her calling, Megan had also found love.
She lived with her boyfriend, Chris. They were together 3 to 4 years. They had the same, group of friends.
She was in a very good place in her life. She had lots of goals to go on to those next levels in school, in her career. Megan was about 2 months away from graduation. She was very excited about it. Never in a million years did I think that somebody would kill her.
Investigators start piecing together a timeline of Megan's last known movements.
I spoke to her that Sunday afternoon. It was about 4 or 5. We would go to Mom's on Sunday and visit and have dinner and just kind of hang out as a family.
But that Sunday was different. Megan said she would be skipping dinner as she had a last-minute job interview.
She said that she would head to Mom's at some point.
But Megan never showed up.
Later on that night, she wasn't there. It wasn't a concern for us. We all thought, okay, well, something else must have come up. She was on her own time, and we'll see her sometime tomorrow.
Tragically, it would only be a matter of hours before Megan is discovered dead and on fire.
I was very much in shock that day. It didn't sink in that somebody killed her. It was just very, very hard to process.
In the interview, Carrie and Megan's mom told us what kind of car she drives. We put a bolo out for that car.
When investigators ask who could have been responsible for Megan's death, her sister doesn't hesitate.
I said, Chris did it. Megan's boyfriend. And that is the only thing that made any sense to me. He asked me, why do you think Chris did it? I thought, Chris and Megan had an up and down relationship. They were like oil and water. They would be hot-headed and tempered at times.
Majority of the time that a female's killed in the United States, it's someone that knew her. As quick as we could, we want to talk to him.
He is a very high suspect.
Coming up, police learn Megan's love life is more complicated than it first appears.
Another person had actually been in a relationship with Megan.
Did a dangerous love triangle lead to Megan's death?
When someone is murdered like that, it's got to be a jilted lover.
She had intended to leave him. That would be an absolute motive for murder.
Just when detectives believe they have an airtight case, a new piece of evidence changes everything.
I saw the video, surveillance of that person.
It caught my attention big time.
Never would I have thought it would wind up like this.
Detectives investigating the vicious murder of 24-year-old Megan Sharpton in Tullahoma, Tennessee, have their first suspect, her 25-year-old boyfriend, Chris Farrell.
Chris and Megan, to me, had an off-and-on relationship. They were both very hot-headed at times, and there were bumps in their relationship.
Once Megan and Chris got together, they were inseparable, but towards the end of Megan's life, their relationship had started growing apart at that point.
As far as Chris is concerned, it was just the only person that was with her on a daily basis. That was the only thing that made sense.
As detectives prepare to bring in Chris for questioning, a fresh lead comes in.
The Bedford County Sheriff's Office had located her car. So I had picked up and rushed to where the car was found at.
The car was sitting out in a rural area between Tullahoma and Shelbyville, Tennessee, approximately 15 to 20 miles away from the crime scene, where Megan was found.
This is an odd place, odd way to leave a car. The car was, that of any young person's. It was cluttery, but there was none of her personal effects.
Investigators do find one item that grabs their attention.
There was a note in the vehicle, in a girl's handwriting, where Megan was going.
It was directions on how to get to an address.
The next thing was to find this address, but there was no address that fit the note.
The directions were to a fictitious place.
In talking to her mother, I learned that she had left to go to this job. Was this the directions that she was given? Did someone lure her here with the intention of doing harm to her? The way this thing was shaping up is that she was abducted where her car was found. She was killed somewhere else and was found on Awalt Road.
We just sealed that car off, and sent it on to the crime lab for DNA testing.
Investigators then head to Megan's apartment to talk to her boyfriend, Chris.
The boyfriend was the first person we looked at. He was distraught. On the night of the murder, Chris had told us that he had left for work, and she had told him before he left she had accepted a job by phone that a girl she had went to school with recommended her for this job, and that she would return in the morning. And in fact, she didn't return. And he became worried, and he had reached out to her mother.
Following up on what Megan's sister Carrie had told them, detectives asked Chris if he and Megan had been having any problems.
Chris described him and Megan's relationship as a good relationship, that they had their ups and downs like anybody else, but that he would never hurt Megan.
Detectives are suspicious he might be hiding something. Why else would Megan's sister point the finger at him so readily? They asked Chris to come down to the station for further questioning.
We interviewed Chris, and he was visibly shaken.
When pressed about his relationship with Megan, Chris changes his story.
He was quite honest. He said, that they didn't have the best relationship, that, it had been somewhat strained. He felt like that maybe she wanted him to have a better job or maybe be more career-orientated.
Megan was getting ready to graduate college and start her career, and I don't think Chris was there at that point in his life. He was still, wanted to be young.
Chris swears he had nothing to do with Megan's death.
Chris's alibi was that he was at work at a local department store where the majority of the night he's going to be on or near some sort of camera.
Chris tells police he left for work at 5 p.m. and was there past midnight. But until his alibi can be confirmed and Megan's time of death is determined, he remains on the suspect list.
From my interview with Chris, I learned that there was another person that lived in the house, Robbie Rosar.
Robbie was one of Chris's friends. He moved in there at the end. My first thought was Robbie hurt Megan. That I'd never met in my life, that I know, nothing about other than what Megan told me. He was a little rough around the edges, but Megan loved everyone.
I reached out that day and I asked him to come in. Robbie was a different person. Robbie was a little darker, a little less happy person.
Investigators ask Robbie point blank where he was when Megan was murdered.
Robbie didn't have an alibi. Robbie showed us he had been texting her all night, even in the morning, worried about her.
He said, "Look, I'm not the killer. I want y'all to find out who killed Megan." And he was very, very adamant.
He wanted to prove his innocence, which was a good indication for me that he didn't do this.
But when detectives ask Robbie about the nature of their relationship, his answer leaves them stunned.
Robbie told me that he had actually been in a relationship with Megan, that they were in fact lovers, and that she had intended to leave Chris. It was a shocker.
Megan had told me a few weeks before her murder that her and Robbie had started to develop more of a relationship versus just friends.
When Chris knew about Robbie, that would be an absolute motive for murder.
And so, again, that's when we thought, did Chris do this? If things got crazy and tensions got high and emotions ran high, this would be a motive for homicide.
A day after 24-year-old Megan Sharpton was violently killed, detectives suspect jealousy could have motivated her murder. Megan was having an affair, but did her boyfriend Chris know?
When someone is murdered like that, you always think it's got to be someone close to her. It's got to be like a jilted lover.
We brought Chris back in the interview room after speaking with Robbie, and we kind of dropped that bombshell on him just to see his reaction.
It turns out Chris did not know about the relationship. Chris was upset. He was visibly upset when he found out that Megan had had relations with Rob, but he maintained that he still loved her and that he'd never hurt her. Chris was sincere And I believe that was true.
Both of them individually took polygraphs. The questions asked were very pointed. You know, did you cause Megan's death? They were very straight up. They both passed.
When Chris and Rob's polygraph came in, it moved them down on the list of suspects. You can't really take them off the list of suspects. They're just simply too close to the victim. But it did move them down.
Putting Chris and Robbie on the back burner, detectives turned to the job offer Megan received the night she was killed. Could that have been connected to her death?
After the polygraph, I started mulling over Chris's interview and the original nuggets that he had given me about the job. He had told us that he thought that it had come in from a girl she had went to school with previously. He had said that I only remember her name is Naomi.
Investigators search through school records and discover Megan had a classmate named Naomi Jones.
Finding her to talk to her about the possibility that she recommended this job to Megan was going to be very important. Had this job possibly led to her death? I went to Naomi's residence. I knocked on the door. Nobody there. I drug out my lawn chair and I sat in the front and I'm going to wait. I'm going to get this statement today. The neighbor kept looking over there like, who is this crazy guy? And I was like, I need to talk to Naomi Jones. He knew the Joneses well enough to have called her. When talking to Naomi, I said, hey, I'm Todd Hyman. I'm with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. I'm investigating the death of Megan Sharpton.
Naomi stated that, she knew Megan. They wasn't close.
She went to school with the year before in nursing school. I learned that they rode to clinicals maybe once together, and she offered up the fact that her husband had drove them. Further talking to her, I learned that she didn't really like Megan for whatever reason. She was very to the point and said, I wouldn't recommend that girl for anything.
Naomi says she has no knowledge of Megan's job offer or her death. While investigators consider their next move, the autopsy report comes in, and it contains a surprising detail.
The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the face and blunt force trauma. She was burned, so the soot had kind of hid the wound.
Megan was shot what the medical examiner's office believes to be a .22 caliber round.
Her skull was broken in several pieces. It's very possible she was hit with a pistol and shot with a pistol.
The autopsy revealed she was deceased at the time of the fire.
She was purposefully burned in an attempt to hide evidence.
The autopsy indicates the fire was set shortly before Megan's body was discovered at 1:18 a.m. on July 2nd. Her time of death was likely before midnight.
Her last moments alive were pretty terrifying.
The report also confirms what police suspected at the scene.
The doctor that performed the autopsy said that there was a presence of sexual assault. There was DNA present. I started feeling like there could be a resolution more quickly with that piece of evidence.
The DNA is rushed to the crime lab for analysis. Then, 2 days after Megan's death, detectives get another possible lead.
July the 4th, there was a guy in the creek fishing who found Megan's purse along with her driver's license, social security card. We never did find her cell phone.
Megan's cell is still missing, but investigators order her phone records, hoping they might point to her killer. As the days start to pass by, Megan's family becomes anxious for answers.
10 days after they found her body, we decided to raise a reward for any information leading to the killer of Meg's case.
Many in town begin to wonder if Megan's murder is connected to another high-profile investigation.
It was the same time frame as the Holly Bobo case that was going on. It was a whodunit, just as ours. It was in Darden, Tennessee, which wasn't too far from here. And, immediately some citizens would ask me, do you think there's any connection?
As detectives compare both cases, they have a chilling realization.
Holly Bobo was a nursing student also. She was abducted from her home. I don't believe her body had been recovered. We obviously had to look at the parallels. Was it a nursing student serial killer?
It's another lead and it's somewhere to go. You've got a killer running around. Who is he going to kill next?
Two weeks after Megan Sharpton was murdered, investigators are searching for a link to the unsolved disappearance of another nursing student in a nearby town a year earlier.
The Holly Bobo case became interest to us, and our investigators reached out to theirs. There was concern that we may be dealing with a serial killer.
While detectives from both cases work together to establish a link, rumors sweep through the community.
I was terrified to go out at night. I didn't like going places I wasn't familiar with, and I lived in fear almost of just everyone.
With Megan's killer still at large, the sense of loss begins to overwhelm her family.
I was really hoping that it would be solved pretty quickly because it was consuming Mom minute by minute. I could feel her emptiness when Megan passed away. She was never the same again.
It absolutely became a mission. I know if it had been my child, I would want somebody to have went that extra mile, to work that extra hour, to find the resolution to what had happened.
Finally, 3 weeks into the investigation, police get the results from the forensic search of Megan's vehicle.
He came back with no evidence. They didn't find anything that shouldn't have been there. There was nothing of value found.
Detectives hope tests on the DNA found inside Megan's body will yield better results. Her approximate time of death was before midnight, so investigators circle back to her boyfriend's alibi.
He said he was working at the time that happened.
Chris was working as a cashier on the evening shift. We go back and pull the video. He was in the store when Megan had been killed. This is not our guy.
Chris contacts police with a lead that sends the investigation in a new direction.
The original phone call about this job opportunity came into an older phone that Megan had.
Chris is able to locate the phone and shows it to detectives.
He was able to go back and find a number that he believed had called proposing this job.
When investigators run the phone number, they get a surprising result.
It was what we refer to as a burner phone.
The burner phone, the fake address, and the suspicious job opportunity all add up to what detectives suspected early on.
She was going to a fake job interview.
So if we could track that phone down, we could get to very possibly who the perpetrator was.
Because burner phones don't require a registered name, the number doesn't lead to anyone.
So I was able to at least track the phone to being sold at the department store here, and I called their loss prevention person. I was like, well, can you pull every one of these sales that was done?
There was like 11 or 12 burner phones purchased, and we pulled video.
We started looking at the males and the questionable ones, and just, who looks like the most suspect person in these pictures.
One of the people paid for their phone, that burner phone, but they had their cell phone out on the camera. And just the demeanor and that just really caught Todd's attention.
It caught my attention big time. He's already got a cell phone. He's buying this burner phone for a reason. We were able to use the video from the department store to follow him from the purchase, out the door, into the parking lot. Almost off camera, we saw him approach a red pickup truck. Why would you park that far out unless you were trying to avoid detection? I take the pictures of this guy and I circulate it to other departments. Within minutes, I had an identification of who this was. This guy's name was Timothy Gifford.
Timmy Gifford is a local drug dealer, not the most honest person around.
I put the word out that I need to find Mr. Gifford. I felt like he was our guy or he was involved.
Officers soon track Timmy down and bring him to the station.
We sit him down in the interview room. I show him, the picture of him buying the phone.
We told him straight up, you're the killer, and we're going to have your DNA. And Timmy was, he was stressed out.
He was like, I'll tell you everything I know. I didn't do this. It wasn't me.
Timmy says he doesn't know Megan and denies speaking to her. When challenged about the burner phone, he tells police he bought it a month before the murder for someone else.
He's like, Donnie Jones. I was like, you gotta be kidding.
Donnie Jones was a police informant.
Donnie'd been a bad boy for a long time. He had a very long rap sheet, thefts and drugs.
Donnie Jones had served time before, and he had been accused of rape before. That right there was a real turn in investigation.
At first, detectives struggled to see how someone like Donnie could even be connected to Megan.
We found out that Donnie was married to Naomi Jones. That was another nugget that was very interesting.
Detectives had already talked to Naomi earlier in the investigation. She told police she did know Megan, but she had never recommended her for a job.
Naomi was somebody that Megan went to school with. They would carpool with each other occasionally. And we found out that Naomi's husband, Donnie Jones, would drive them if the weather was bad. Naomi's connected to a male with a criminal history, and he knew Megan Sharpton. There was a lot of aha moments in this case, but we're going somewhere. We've got something here.
3 weeks after the murder of Megan Sharpton, detectives are interviewing Timmy Gifford. He tells police he bought the burner phone for Donnie Jones and divulges important details about the red truck seen in the surveillance footage.
Timmy Gifford said that the truck was Donnie's and that a few days after the murder, he had replaced all the interior. And I was like, ooh, that's probably my murder vehicle right there.
The carpet has been replaced. It's been completely detailed. That is a clue that you may be on the right track.
Timmy also tells police Donnie traded the truck to his brother a week after the murder.
Everything is pointing towards Donnie Jones. As quick as we could, we got the search warrant, and we took the truck directly to the TBI crime lab.
Investigators have zeroed in on Donnie as a suspect and quickly pay him a visit.
In his initial statement to me, it was something to the effect of, I hardly know that girl.
I ain't never had no contact with her.
But you knew of her?
Yeah, I did know of her. I don't know much about her. I knew of her. When's the last time you talked to Megan? I ain't never talked to her. No, I take it back. When my old lady was going to school, one day they both needed to ride.
Donnie is adamant he had nothing to do with Megan's death.
His alibi was he was home with the kids.
I'm with my kids all the time. That's all I can do. I got a 9-month-old and 7-year-old twins.
Without something concrete showing that he was home, his alibi didn't hold water. He could have left with the children, he could have left the children with somebody.
Detectives confront Donnie with Timmy's claims.
This guy said he gave you this phone, and this is the number, the last number to call her when she was alive. He said he gave a phone to me? Yeah. He ain't gave me no phone. I have nothing to hide. Y'all can search my house. Y'all can do it now.
We searched the house. We didn't come up with a lot of evidence. There was very little to be found.
Donnie also consents to provide a DNA sample. While they wait on the results, detectives get the forensics back on the red truck.
The truck had been cleaned, almost sanitized. Even the interior parts that I gathered off the search warrant, they didn't come back with any evidentiary value.
Megan's family is briefed on the new developments.
I saw the video, surveillance of that person purchasing the burner cell phone. I saw somebody that none of us knew that had no association to Megan whatsoever. Todd had a name of the person who that burner cell phone was purchased for, and I just kind of shrugged my shoulders like, okay, who is this guy? Nothing made any sense to me.
4 weeks after Megan's murder, the crime lab sends investigators the results of the analysis on the DNA from Megan's autopsy.
We got a DNA hit.
And the hit come back, and it's Donnie Frank Jones.
A supervisor of mine called Donnie up, and he's like, hey, I need to meet with you.
Donnie comes down to the station where detectives confront him.
I said, did you and Megan Sharpton ever date? No. Did you and Megan Sharpton ever just hook up, one night stand, party or something? No. Were you and Megan Sharpton during this date, the date of the homicide? No. And then Todd asked, why would your DNA be inside of her? And it was just, his face went, just couldn't believe it.
He got very, very, very irate, mad. After he had a moment, Donnie said, I just had sex with her.
However, his initial statement of he had never been around her other than at one time kind of put him in a corner.
Detectives don't buy Donnie's story, but they'll need something more concrete to press charges.
All we can prove right now is he had sex with her.
That was a concern of the district attorney, is that, a consensual relationship could have left that evidence behind.
Investigators have no choice but to let Donnie go.
It was really frustrating for me.
I was in complete disbelief. It was infuriating that he said it was consensual, and so he was allowed to walk free as they put the pieces together.
Hoping to prove who was with Megan when she was murdered, detectives run a detailed search on 4 phones: Megan's, Donnie's, Timmy's, and the burner.
We asked for cell phone GPS analysis. They can take some technical data and plot it out on a map and show you to some certainty an area where a phone call was made. We're in kind of a waiting pattern, hoping for phone records for the silver bullet to kind of put this thing away.
The cell phone analysis will take weeks, but investigators get a chance to get Donnie off the streets when they discover a rifle in the trunk of his car.
Donnie's a convicted felon. A convicted felon cannot possess firearms.
Even though the rifle is determined not to be the murder weapon, it's enough to arrest Donnie. Now detectives must establish if he killed Megan Sharpton.
We got him into custody. We had the DNA, but at the same time, we needed more. We needed as much as we possibly could get.
It's all theoretical until you can prove he murdered her.
4 months after Megan's murder, investigators receive the detailed phone data and find a clear link between Megan and her killer.
And I was just ecstatic. It's hell yeah.
I met with Kelly, and I told her in person, I know who killed your daughter.
Four months after the savage murder of Megan Sharpton, detectives have used cell phone GPS data to prove who killed the 24-year-old nursing student.
That's Donnie Jones.
On the night of the murder, the burner phone, I will refer to it as the murder phone, and Donnie's phone, they were in or about the same location. Timmy's phone is not involved. The murder phone and Megan's phone are talking to one another. And the cell phone records will show they were coming in contact with one another, and then they both stopped where her car was found. And I think at that time is when she was abducted. Using a with the cell phone data, we was able to show that at first that Donnie was close to the place where we believe she was abducted at. Then that he was close to the place I believe that he killed her at, and then that he was close to where the body was found.
Donnie's family owned several farms in that area, and that's where we felt like that she was murdered.
They gave us permission to search that area, and it's an extremely secluded place.
Investigators make a telling discovery.
There was a burn barrel there that caught my eye. I found a purple scarf with black stars on it. It was later identified by her sister, Carrie, as a gift that she had given Megan. I went from an absolute whodunit to this guy might have done it to, oh, this guy definitely done it.
The overwhelming evidence is what made the DA take that step to indict him.
I was elated. I went to the Coffee County Sheriff's Department and had him brought up, and I arrested him.
On November 5th, 2012, Donnie Jones is charged with first-degree murder, rape, and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping.
One attorney, that was it. He had no more to say.
Never would I have thought it would wind up like this. When Donnie was charged, Mom, she was still pretty overwhelmed, but it was a relief to start learning that we were going to get the details of what events led up to that day.
Based on the evidence collected, investigators pieced together how Donnie lured and then murdered Megan. It paints a disturbing picture of a calculating predator.
So while looking into the murder phone, we started backtracking all the numbers that it had called. And there was a pattern. Everyone that was called with that phone was someone that was sitting with the elderly or doing some kind of nursing in-home service. The murder phone was used just seeking out a victim. Donnie reached out to Megan. He knew well enough to go in his wife's phone and get her number out, and that's how all this started.
She had known Donnie and his wife, not close friends, but knew them. She answered that call from Donnie.
Megan was on her way to a job that didn't exist. The directions she had got were not good. She had to call our suspect.
He met her, at which time he abducted her and went back to one of the family's farms.
Megan Sharpson's last few minutes of life was pure hell and panic and fear.
He raped her and shot her. Megan was beaten prior to being killed. He moved her from there to where he set her body on fire to try to hide his crimes. And then he went home and acted like nothing happened.
Donnie Jones is just a cold-blooded killer. Sexual deviant, cold-blooded killer.
7 months after Megan's murder, Donnie Jones pleads guilty, and on February 4th, 2013, he's sentenced to life without parole.
I feel like there will never be enough done to him. He's sick. He's a monster. There is no reasonable explanation why he did it.
There was a sense of accomplishment that we moved so fast in finding out who killed her. Had we not have caught him, he would have reoffended.
Detectives do determine Megan's murder was not connected to the Holly Bobo case.
There was 4 people arrested in the Holly Bobo case. It had nothing to do with my case.
If Megan hadn't lost her life, I feel very confident that Donnie Jones would still be out, trying to trick young women. Megan put him behind bars for life. She sacrificed her life to keep everybody else in our community safe.
Despite getting justice for Megan, the Sharpton family suffers another tragedy just 9 months later in November 2013.
Mom took her life 16 months after Megan's death. Her heart was just incredibly broken, and she made the choice. She wanted to be with Megan.
Yeah, he essentially killed them both. Sure did.
Our family time, that's when I missed her the most. I missed that laugh. If you just heard Meg's laugh, you would be having a much better day. I miss those specific moments, those milestones that she's not going to get to be a part of.
I thought Megan and I would be friends for, on into adulthood. We were supposed to be together forever, as best friends, as sidekicks. She was not someone you could forget. There was a memorial placed on the side of the road where she was found, and it's this beautiful giant star sculpture. It's very cool, and Megan would absolutely love it.
A beloved former school teacher and wife of a small-town mayor.
Charlotte was very compassionate about students and very well liked.
She was a wonderful mother.
Found murdered in her home.
It inflamed the community because of how popular she was.
Detectives find evidence of a violent struggle.
She had been savagely attacked.
You could see that her wrist was broke.
Who would kill this loving wife and mother?
There was nobody that you could think of that would want her dead.
It's going to be one of those cases of a whodunit.
Suspicions run rampant in this small town.
People are trying to help the police crack this case, but it's just all of these rumors and innuendo.
Somebody was at a party bragging about killing Charlotte.
He was spending money like it was going out of style.
A lady reported that her boyfriend tried to strangle her. We're thinking that's a very good suspect.
Police close in, but a public accusation upends the case.
He gave a statement on live radio accusing him of the murder.
They said they finally realized who killed her.
He was in shock.
I never would have expected them to be a suspect that will haunt me for the rest of my life.
Lanett, Alabama, a small family-oriented town in the heart of the Deep South.
Lanett was a mill town. It sits right on the banks of the Chattahoochee River, one of Alabama's major waterways. I always felt safe when I was there.
Some people would leave their homes unlocked, but we just never had any crime there.
Lanett is a very tight-knit area. Everybody knows everybody here.
August 4th, 1998 was a lazy summer day in Lanett until the peace was shattered by a 911 call.
It was around 5:30 when we got the call of an unresponsive woman.
Police are surprised to learn the call has come from the home of the town's mayor.
Everyone was shocked that it was their house, and I was there within 2 or 3 minutes.
The 911 caller, Heather Waits, leads police inside to her unresponsive mother.
Heather was very hysterical, and the first thing she could say was, "Help my mom." The first thing I did was go and check for a pulse, and she was cool to the touch. And you could tell that she's been expired for a little while.
Police are stunned to find Charlotte Waits, the wife of the town's mayor, dead in her home. At first, it appears that Charlotte has suffered a tragic accident.
We noticed she did have a little foam coming out the corner of her mouth, so we thought that, maybe had a seizure or a reaction to a medicine.
As detectives look closer, they begin to suspect foul play.
There were red flags that this was more than just an accident.
Her right arm in the wrist area appeared to be broken. She had what appeared to be scratch marks on the bottom of her chin, and she had some red markings around her neck. We made a decision right then that we're going to proceed with a homicide investigation.
Detectives find signs of a violent struggle.
There was a picture that had been knocked off the wall. We could see the nail that was holding that picture up was bent down towards the stairway. So my theory is that it was a fight coming down the stairs.
It just looked suspicious. The fact that her purse was dumped over, but her purse was still there. You couldn't tell if it was a stage scene or if somebody had come in and she had interrupted a burglary.
Was Charlotte the victim of a robbery gone wrong, or did her killer want it to appear that way?
We didn't see any signs of forced entry. One of the investigators went to the utility room and found 2 bloody towels. So we want to find out who might have bled on those towels.
As forensics collect evidence, Charlotte's husband, Barry, arrives on the scene.
Barry had worked at the National Guard Armory. At the time, Barry was the acting mayor.
The look on his face, he was in shock. He was very, very upset.
He started hyperventilating, grabbing his chest. He began to go into what we thought was a heart attack.
As Barry is rushed to the hospital, news of Charlotte's murder spreads.
I remember the state of shock that I felt when I got down there to the emergency room. The girls were there, and of course they were upset. Their mother was dead, and their daddy was under a doctor's care for heart issues.
Investigators turn to Charlotte's daughters for information about their mother.
Charlotte was a very kind, gentle person, always smiling, and cared about others.
Charlotte studied education at Auburn University and got married to Barry Waits right after graduating in 1971.
She was a second grade teacher. She was very compassionate about her students and just very well liked.
Later, Charlotte became a devoted school administrator.
She was genuine through and through. She just made such a nice reputation for herself in the school system and in the community as well. Barry was head of the National Guard Armory, and he would often let us use the armory for the science fair, social studies fair, and Charlotte, she was always there helping me with everything.
Charlotte and Barry had the perfect marriage. 2 great careers, and they had 2 daughters. Heather was going to college, and Kara was still in high school, getting ready to graduate.
When you was around them, you could feel the love. They were well respected in this community.
Charlotte was a wonderful mother. I could tell what a deep love she had for her family.
Who would take the life of this kind and caring woman, and why? Detectives question Heather about how she came to find her mother's body.
Heather came home for the weekend. As a college kid, it's time to get your clothes washed and get some good home cooking.
Heather said she came into the house, and then when she called out for her mom, and that's when she noticed her mom at the bottom of the stairs. And when she run up to her, she realized that she wasn't breathing.
And when she felt cold, she began to panic. And then that's when she called the ambulance. And then she called her dad.
Police are eager to question the mayor, but doctors say they want to keep him overnight for observation.
We did find out that he didn't have a heart attack. It was an anxiety type situation. But we were never able to talk to Barry while he was in the hospital. He got out the next day. On Saturday morning following the murder, we were at the office, myself, the other investigators, and then all of a sudden Barry walks in.
When it's this type of murder, it's usually someone very close to them at the same time. Nobody would ever suspect the mayor of doing anything like this. Anyone that knew Barry knew that he's like a big teddy bear.
My knowledge of Barry at that point, I'd never seen him upset. He was just friendly and well respected. Barry didn't fit any kind of profile to do this kind of crime. But we did take the opportunity to just look over him while we were talking to him, see if we could see any visible injuries, and we could not.
Barry offers to help with the investigation and agrees to be interviewed. Detectives ask him for his whereabouts the previous day.
He told us that the morning he had gone to the armory, just had a normal day. Around 11 or so, he left the armory and had gone by the barbershop. He said it was full, so he went back to work the rest of the day until he received a phone call from his daughter telling him that she had found her mother. So he rushed home.
Investigators hope to verify the mayor's alibi, but they haven't established a clear timeline for Charlotte's murder.
first day of business after the homicide, the only thing we had was a victim in a neighborhood that these things don't happen. It's going to be one of those cases of a whodunit.
Nobody disliked Miss Waits, and there was definitely nobody that you could think of that would want her dead.
As fear grips the town of Lanett, suspicion starts to fall on someone close to Charlotte's daughter.
Through talking to family, we had learned that Kara was dating a boy that her parents really didn't like because he was living a rough life, hand to mouth. Barry and Charlotte both told her that she was not going to see him. And then, of course, they learned that she was seeing him behind their back. At the time of the murder, Kara was still in high school and she was pregnant. I believe that Charlotte knew that Kara was pregnant.
Investigators wonder if there had been a deadly confrontation between Charlotte and her daughter's lover.
People have been killed for less. Maybe he thought, hey, I want to see your daughter, you're not letting me, so you're going to pay for it.
Coming up, the list of suspects grows.
People start calling the tip lines or saying, well, so-and-so told me so-and-so.
And small-town secrets are revealed.
He had been to prison for violent crimes.
People are starting to say, you're maybe not the person we thought that you were.
Then, new evidence stuns investigators.
He's got a money issue, and that's a flag.
But the prints did not match.
I can't put this behind me until it's solved.
You may think that you know who did the crime, but you may be wrong.
Just 24 hours into the investigation of Charlotte Waite's murder, police have their first suspect. Her 17-year-old daughter's boyfriend.
We had learned that at the time of the murder, Kara was pregnant.
Her boyfriend just wasn't the person that they wanted their daughter to be dating. So maybe there had been some type of conflict.
Police bring him into the station for questioning.
He told us that he knew that Barry and Charlotte didn't like him, but he said that the day of the murder, he was working with a grass cutting crew somewhere. We were able to go to the person that he was working for that day, and they verified his whereabouts through the entire day of the murder.
With Kara's boyfriend looking unlikely as the killer, detectives take a closer look at Kara.
The day of the murder of Kara, we determined that she was at work babysitting. Then we started looking at Heather. We were able to show that she was at Auburn University. She had actually left 20 or 30 minutes prior to finding her mother. We eliminated her.
It's been less than 2 days since Charlotte Waits was found dead, and the investigation is under intense scrutiny from the public and the media.
We did have a lot of pressure put on us from the beginning because it's the mayor's wife. He's a pillar of the community and she's a pillar of the community.
With this case being such a high-profile nature, there was a lot of eyes looking at us.
I was the host of the morning show on WRLD radio. We were getting calls from people all over the county. I knew Charlotte's family real well. There was so much speculation at the time.
Under the close watch of the media, police turn their attention back to the mayor's alibi.
On any homicide, when your victim is married, you will start inside and then you work your way out. We wanted to find out the timeline of his whereabouts to eliminate him as being a suspect.
Barry claims that on the day of the murder, he left work around 11:30 a.m. to run an errand, then returned.
Barry said that once he got back to the armory, that he sent a fax to his commander. We traveled to Birmingham to verify who he sent the fax to, and it showed us that Barry got back to the armory at the time that he said he did.
Police confirm Barry's fax receipt has a 12:30 p.m. timestamp, but investigators still don't know the exact time of Charlotte's murder. While they wait for the autopsy results, they hope Charlotte's coworkers can help provide the answer.
The people that Charlotte worked with told us that Charlotte had gotten to work that morning, and that afternoon they were having a baby shower for one of her coworkers. They told us that she left around 11 or so.
And and she comes home to get fixed up to go out to the little baby shower.
They told us that they were getting ready to order out lunch and try to get in touch with her to find out what she wanted. Couldn't get an answer.
No one saw Charlotte again until Heather discovered her body nearly 6 hours later.
Our office was horrified. We just couldn't wrap our minds around the fact that our little ray of sunshine was dead. Sergeant Richard Carter was asking us a lot of questions, like, did Charlotte and Barry get along? Charlotte and Barry were always teasing with each other, and he was always being silly and funny, and she would roll her eyes at him, and they didn't appear to have any problems. We said what a wonderful husband he had been, and what a good daddy.
Investigators hope to get more information about Barry and Charlotte's relationship from their daughters.
We want to find out more about the dynamics of the family. But when the daughters realized that we were looking at their father as the suspect, they became upset with us. So they broke contact, and we've lost contact with them. When we were speaking to her friends and her family, nobody could provide anyone who could have a reason to kill Charlotte.
Hitting dead ends, investigators dig deeper and begin to look beyond Charlotte's immediate family. They request an interview with her brother, Gene.
Gene said he loved his sister tremendously, and her entire family. He talked about him and Barry being like brothers.
Then, Gene reveals a key piece of information.
Charlotte had an uncle that had passed away, written into the inheritance. Charlotte got 50%.
And we're talking several hundred acres here, which is worth a good bit of money. At this time, they're starting to build auto manufacturing areas here, and you can get lots of money for selling land or land rights.
Gene tells police that the inheritance caused problems in the extended family.
There was this cousin who felt like he deserved part of that estate. So he was contesting the will.
I've actually had to try murder cases where people have shot each other over property lines, and that's nothing compared to thousands and thousands of dollars worth of property. And so you've got heightened tension.
Gene also tells investigators that Charlotte was due to meet her attorney about the inheritance on the day she was killed.
We don't believe in coincidence that on the day she was supposed to have a meeting with an attorney is the day that she was murdered. And at that point, Charlotte's cousin became suspect number one.
Detectives investigating the murder of Charlotte Waits have discovered she was about to inherit a large tract of land from her uncle, leaving another family member angry.
Charlotte's cousin, Wayne Rice, felt that he was entitled to part of it, and we're talking a substantial good bit of property.
She did not like conflict. And the day of the murder, she was supposed to have a meeting with an attorney. Of course, she never made the meeting.
Detectives want to know if Wayne went to Charlotte's home to confront her before the meeting.
Maybe he thought if she was eliminated, he would have more opportunity for him to get more money out of it. When we contacted Wayne, he agreed to meet with us, but not without his attorney present.
Police ask Wayne how he feels about being left out of the family inheritance.
He knew that disputing that will caused broken relationships, but he said that he didn't wish any ill will on Charlotte.
Investigators ask for his whereabouts on the day of the murder.
Wayne had told us that he had gone to work early that morning. He'd gotten off work, gone home. We wanted to find out, did he have any opportunity to come to Lynette, commit the murder, and leave with nobody seeing him. We talked to 3 of his co-workers, and they confirmed that he never left, didn't even leave for lunch.
With Wayne ruled out, police go back to the drawing board.
Once we were able to eliminate Wayne, we were kind of left, again, at point A. Who could commit this crime and leave and nobody see anything out of the ordinary?
2 weeks after Charlotte's murder, detectives received the autopsy report.
The pathologist He explained that it was a strangulation.
The report concludes that the murder weapon was a piece of Charlotte's own clothing.
Miss Waits had on a blouse that kind of had the little strings that went across it. And those strings actually created the ligature mark around her neck. They were pulled from behind.
The autopsy also confirms that Charlotte suffered other injuries in the attack.
She was thrown to the floor in such a violent manner that she suffered a dislocated wrist and a head injury that by itself could have killed her.
And the report suggests that Charlotte was struck in the face.
The doctor felt like she was punched, which could have subdued her.
The blood on the towels found at the scene is identified as Charlotte's.
The bloody towels were kind of stuck down in the bottom and covered up, like somebody was trying to hide them.
I would have to describe the last few minutes of Charlotte's life as complete terror. She had been savagely attacked.
Police receive the crime scene fingerprint analysis and discover a print that doesn't belong.
And we get the fingerprint report back, and then there's some unidentified fingerprints. We can't put a suspect with those fingerprints.
Police run the prints through the Alabama State Database, but it doesn't produce a match.
This is so frustrating because you owe it to the victim's family to go make that arrest and always hoping that we're going to get that silver bullet that's going to put it all together, and you never get it.
Then, just a few days later, a local report of a violent assault draws detectives' attention.
Our patrol guys got a call one night to a residence in regards to a lady that called and reported that her boyfriend, Rodney Borum, tried to strangle her. When the officer wrote up the report, he said, "This looks awfully familiar to the case that you're working on."
Detectives interview the victim and are struck by the similarities in the attack.
She reported to the police officers that her boyfriend attacked her from behind, tried to strangle her, but she was able to get away from him.
We knew Miss Waits had been choked from behind, so you have to look at that.
Is this an isolated case or an ongoing pattern of violent attacks?
We realized that he had actually had a pretty extensive criminal history from another state. He had been to prison numerous times for violent type crimes. So we were extremely interested in Rodney.
Police obtain Rodney's prints from the Georgia State Database.
We sent those off to the crime lab to compare with the prints that were lifted at the crime scene. When we spoke to Rodney, it was explained to him that this crime looked a lot like what took place with Charlotte. So he knew without a doubt why we were questioning him.
As police look into Rodney's claim that he was working on the day of the murder, the lab comes back with fingerprint results.
We got notified that Rodney Borum's prints did not match. And through his alibi, we were able to eliminate him from being in the area that day.
Police can't charge Rodney for the alleged assault on his girlfriend due to lack of evidence, so they let him go. Once again, the investigation hits a dead end.
You have to keep an open mind. Always be ready for something that's going to take you down a different path.
A few days later, a stunning piece of information comes in on the police tip line.
We'd gotten a tip that there was a man at a party bragging about killing Charlotte.
The tipster claims he overheard someone named Kenny Boyd confess to the crime.
He said that he had been at a party with Kenny Boyd, and that Kenny Boyd had told him that he had gone in to rob Miss Waits, and that she caught him burglarizing the house.
We thought this is what we needed. This is the tip that we need. It's going to get us where we need to be.
When police go to locate Kenny, they don't have to look very far.
When we went and found him, he was inside our county jail.
It's been almost 2 months since the murder of Charlotte Waits, and a witness claims he recently overheard Kenny Boyd confess to the crime.
We were told that Kenny Boyd was at a party bragging about killing Charlotte.
The witness also tells police that Kenny had an accomplice.
Kenny told them that they were breaking in Charlotte's house, Then Charlotte came home. They jumped her, killed her. Didn't mean to kill her, but did.
The two suspects are well known to police.
They were always in trouble, in and out of jail.
Detectives head to Lynette County Jail, where Kenny has been in custody for several days on an unrelated charge.
We got inside the jail, sat down in a cell, began interviewing Kenny Boyd. He said he didn't know her, and he said he did not commit the murder. He said, I don't even know where they live, but we want to find out what it was he did that day. Kenny begins to tell us that they are out going to a local store stealing cigarettes, and then they're going into a different part of town selling them for crack.
Detectives are skeptical of the account and want to hear what Kenny's partner in crime has to say.
We find out that the other suspect's in prison in Georgia. So we traveled into Georgia, and he tells us basically the same story. He says, yeah, we were stealing cigarettes.
With identical stories from two suspects, investigators look to confirm their alibi.
To verify his alibi, the only thing we can do is go to the store that he said that they were stealing cigarettes from.
Police search the store's security footage for proof the men were there.
At the time of the murder, it was documented on video that they are inside that store that he said they were in. It was very frustrating. You may think that you know who did the crime, but you may be wrong.
Later on, we found out the guy that had called the tip line on Kenny Boyd just basically didn't like Mr. Boyd.
Police are increasingly concerned that the tip line may be doing more harm than good.
That's the thing about a small town, and everybody knows everybody, and people start calling the tip lines saying, well, so-and-so told me so-and-so.
Through this entire case, we would continually get tips. At times we felt like they were good tips, credible. Other times we knew that they were just trying to meddle in the case. The hardest thing was all the different rabbit trails that we kept having to go down because every single tip that we got, we had to chase it.
That's slowing the investigation down to a crawl because at a trial, you've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody committed this crime. And to do that, you've got to disprove all of these bad tips and the rumors and innuendo.
With the investigation at a standstill, the public is increasingly angry that no arrest has been made in the 6 months since Charlotte's murder.
The people in this community were frightened. Any murder in a small town, people here know everybody, so you got a lot of pressure when you got a case like this.
The fact that Charlotte was so well known inflamed the community. I think there was a lot of angst because of how popular she was and how gentle she was.
Our hearts still ached. It was awful. I would go to her grave and wonder if your murderer comes here and looks. And at this grave, she was my dear friend. And I can't put this behind me until it's solved.
The pressure never lessened on this case. The community demanded that somebody gets brought to justice on this case.
As months turn into years without justice being served, Charlotte's loved ones carry on as best they can. Barry Waits is no longer mayor, but he continues to serve on Lynette City Council. His daughters, Heather and Kara, have both moved out of town.
The girls went on with their lives. Heather got married, and Barry moved on with his life. And he eventually remarried.
Every investigator always has one case that stays with them. You go to bed with it, you wake up with it. I never considered it a cold case because it always sat on my desk. It consumes you, especially in a small town, when you know the people involved.
3 years after Charlotte's murder, a bizarre development puts the case back in the spotlight.
Barry was on our city council, and Barry decided to run for re-election. Well, there was a gentleman who lived in the county who decided to run against Barry.
The person running for city council against Barry Waits at that time, his name was Rod Spraggins.
Rod was a bail bondsman. He was very well known throughout the community.
While on the campaign trail, Rod Spraggins makes a stunning statement in the local press.
Rod was quoted in the paper as saying that he was 100% convinced that Barry Waits had killed Charlotte.
Years after the murder of Charlotte Waits, Rod Spraggins has publicly declared that he knows who killed her.
Rod said Charlotte came to me in a dream and told me that Barry's the one that killed her.
Rod Spraggins gave a statement on live radio accusing Barry of the murder. And we got a lot of calls on that, you know. You got people openly saying it on the radio. Why can't y'all make an arrest?
Rod's comments raise eyebrows, but police are suspicious of his motives.
I think it might not have been taken as seriously knowing it was Rod.
Rod Spraggins he's a con man. One of those that just stirred up stuff. And I don't know what his intent was, but in our eyes as investigators, Rod had no evidence.
But then, Rod's rash allegation sparks an unexpected development in the case. As talk about Barry Waits spreads, new rumors emerge about a hidden and disturbing side of the former mayor.
I kept hearing these rumors. Barry was the caretaker of his mother's savings account. And it was my understanding that out of $100,000, there was $100 and some change left in the account.
We found out that his mother was actually losing her house. And people are starting to look at him going, man, you're maybe not the person we thought that you were.
Police decide to take a closer look at Barry's finances.
As we're pulling banking records, I discovered where Barry had taken $12,000 out of his mother's account, put it into his personal account, and spent the money. And this had been prior to the murder. So I think he's stealing from his mother. Where did the money go?
You know, if you'll steal from your mother, you'll steal from anybody.
Further analysis of Barry's bank records lead police to suspect that Barry is hiding an illicit source of income.
We need to find out where he's stealing money from. So, start another side investigation into his financial dealings at work.
Investigators interview Barry's superior at the National Guard Armory.
The commander was telling me that Barry really doesn't have any way to steal money, but they're allowed to rent out the armory for weddings and stuff like that. The commander said, but he hasn't rented this thing out in quite a while.
Investigators find that Barry had been renting out the armory without notifying his superiors.
Barry was using his position to rent the armory out, and then he was holding the money on his own. And that actually amounted up to a pretty substantial amount.
Barry had worked for the National Guard Armory for at least 20 years. When they realized that he was stealing money from them, they were in shock. They couldn't believe it.
Barry agrees to talk to police about the alleged embezzlement.
We went to interview him in regards to the theft. He confessed right away about the theft, gave us a full statement. We indicted him, and he ended up working out a plea bargain agreement, and he was sentenced to 6 months in jail.
With Barry temporarily behind bars, investigators shift their focus to one crucial question. Could his greed and financial desperation have had something to do with Charlotte's murder?
Just because you're a thief doesn't make you a murderer, but because you need money real bad, that is motive for you to kill somebody. Barry's got a money issue, and that's a flag.
Police discover a pattern of behavior that began years prior, during his marriage to Charlotte.
At the time of the murder, they were behind on several payments, car payments, telephone. They were behind in their utility bills. Although we don't know where the money's going, Couldn't determine if Barry had a girlfriend or anything. Couldn't find any gambling problems, no drug issues.
Police finally uncover the nature of Barry's. He hastily hides the bloody towels and dumps Charlotte's purse.
And then he leaves and he starts putting his alibi together. He then goes back to the armory and he sends a fax, and that fax is supposed to be putting him out of the time frame of being at the house the time she's killed.
The prosecution shows that Barry had sufficient time to commit the murder.
There was an hour and a half time frame from when Mr. Waits had left the armory and back to the armory when he sends a fax.
And prosecutors proved that every other suspect had an airtight alibi.
Every other name, every other person that was mentioned, we can eliminate them. But we could not eliminate Barry.
Later, an expert rules out the possibility of an unknown intruder based on further analysis of the unidentified prints at the scene.
The fingerprint expert says these are little kids' fingerprints. They don't have anything to do with this crime. But Barry Waits' fingerprints were down low, close to Charlotte Waits' body.
Finally, Barry's daughters take the stand.
You could read it on their faces and you could hear it in their voices. They were 100% convinced that their dad killed their mother.
After a brief deliberation, the jury reaches a verdict.
When the jury came back guilty, it wasn't relief. It was just a feeling of calm.
I went to her grave that afternoon and I said, okay, sweet girl, you can rest in peace, because we know that your killer is going to pay for what he did.
Barry Waits, the former mayor of Lynette, is sentenced to 40 years in prison.
I think at one time, Barry was a person that intended to take care of his family. But whatever demons he had that made him burn up his family's money, his mother's money, consumed him, overtook him, and the need for money was more important than his wife's life or his daughter's love.
This sweet family was totally devastated by that one senseless criminal act. I think Charlotte would want to be remembered as a person who loved life, loved her family, loved her profession. Every day of my life, I miss her.
Point for us because prior to the time, the girls wouldn't talk to us because the investigation was pointing to their father.
As time went on, Heather and Kara began to have doubts about Barry's innocence.
When Heather and Kara came forward, they began to tell investigators about their dad stealing money from them.
The women provide a detailed account of how their father had left them penniless.
Because of Barry being a suspect in his wife's murder, the insurance company would never pay her death benefit. At some point, he was able to convince the insurance company to leave the money to the daughters.
At that point, Barry made his daughters an offer for Charlotte's inherited property.
He said, if you'll give me that insurance money, I will give you the land. So they give their dad the money. But when the land dispute settled, he signed over the property to his new wife and left his daughters out to dry.
As police dig deeper, they learn how Barry had manipulated his daughters into silence.
The youngest girl had been being told by her father, you're the main suspect in this case. You can't talk to the police because everybody in this town believes that you killed your mother.
Detectives also find out that Barry tried to throw police off his trail by providing false tips.
He's been submitting Kara's name, submitting the boyfriend's name, throwing red herrings at us. You're making us chase down rabbit holes.
Now they've learned what kind of person their dad is, and they said they finally realized that their dad killed their mother.
With the women offering to testify against their father, the district attorney reviews the evidence and decides to prosecute the case.
The day that we were able to have that warrant served, it was a good day.
Barry is charged with the first-degree murder of his wife of over 2 decades, Charlotte Waits. But the case is not a slam dunk.
You can convict on circumstantial evidence, but when you do that, you have to rule out every other plausible explanation.
The trial begins in November of 2006. Prosecutors begin by describing how and why Barry killed his wife. They assert that Barry left work around 11:30 a.m. to confront Charlotte at home about her disputed inheritance.
So Barry left the armory, went straight home to talk her out of making that settlement offer.
And Barry comes home, and they start arguing, and she says, "This is my family, and I'm going to do it, and this is my decision."
Then, Barry turned violent.
And at that point, he gets her. It caused her nose to bleed, and she wipes up with towels, and that was enough. She's just getting out of there and getting away from Barry.
But Barry doesn't let Charlotte escape.
He reaches and grabs her shirt and pulls her shirt back and starts choking her. And he pulls it so tight that he absolutely strangles the life out of Miss Waits. And then he takes her and just kicks her down the steps. He goes down and leans over the body to make sure that she's dead.
Prosecutors say Barry attempted to cover up his crime. He hastily hides the bloody towels